All right, we are ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. Today is City Council's work session. It's Tuesday, November 14th, 2023. I am calling this meeting to order. Notice is hereby given to the members of the City Council and to the general public that at this work session, the City Council may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for discussion and consultation with the city's attorneys for legal advice on any item listed on the following agenda. Can we have roll call?
Mayor Daggett,
Here.
Vice Mayor Aslan,
Here.
Councilmember Harris,
Here.
Councilmember House,
I'm here.
Councilmember Matthews,
Here.
Councilmember McCarthy, Councilmember Sweet.
Thank you. And as I understand it, Councilmember McCarthy will be joining us a little bit later. And Councilmember Sweet is making her way back to Flagstaff, but will not be with us this evening. And Council, I know I usually ask you ahead of time, and I didn't tonight. So, Vice Mayor, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and Councilmember Matthews' mission, and Councilmember Harris' land acknowledgement?
Certainly. Please stand as you can.
Sorry, excuse me, Mayor. I'm sorry. I do not have any of my materials with me, and I'm on a different computer. So can someone else do the land acknowledgement, please?
You bet. Councilmember House, are you able to do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, I should be able to.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with the pledge.
Join me in standing.
Councilmember Matthews?
Thank you, Mayor. The mission of the City of Flagstaff is to protect and enhance the quality of life for all.
Thank you. Councilmember House?
Thank you, Mayor. The Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by Native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this as home.
Thank you, Councilmember. Moving down to public participation. This enables the public to address the council about items that are not on the prepared agenda. Public participation appears on the agenda twice, right now and at the end. Anyone wishing to comment at the meeting is asked to fill out a speaker card and to submit it to the recording clerk. You may address the council up to 3 times throughout the meeting, including comments made during public participation. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and there is a timer up here. And we will start with Eric Wolverton.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and city staff. My name is Eric Wolverton. I'm the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity of Northern Arizona. In 9 days, the majority of American families will be sharing a meal together while giving thanks to health, accomplishments, and to having a safe space to celebrate in their homes. This Thursday at 2 p.m. at the Murdoch Center parking lot, Habitat for Humanity of Northern Arizona is giving thanks for the thousands of individual community members that have contributed in one shape or form to build our second starter home for the Flagstaff community. This particular starter home is being provided to Sarah, a city employee at our very own Flagstaff Library. Sarah has suffered from epilepsy for a good part of her life, having endured thousands of seizures. Through all of this, she never slowed down from wanting to become a homeowner in Flagstaff. Her future starter home will make that dream a reality and provide a quiet, safe environment, allowing her to manage her health needs. I invite each of you and all of Flagstaff to join us this Thursday and celebrate what it means to keep hardworking Flagstaff residents and families where they want to be, right here in Flagstaff. So what steps do we need to do to keep this momentum going? Habitat has submitted to the city our concept plan for the 40 starter home neighborhood in Timber Sky and have already received approval, and we are currently working on the site and grading plans to allow us to develop that land. But that means Habitat is not building more starter homes for another full year. This is far from okay, and it is a reminder that Habitat for Humanity is simply a conduit for the city to address your declared housing emergency. If the city has land set aside for affordable workforce housing currently, Habitat is ready for the challenge to develop such lands for the use of the city's constituents. Furthermore, barriers that make our partnerships less effective are not helpful. Habitat only learned yesterday that the City Affordable Housing Development Incentive Program, established over 15 years ago, can no longer provide support for water and sewer tap fees. This is a $10,000 financial burden to Habitat for building homes on city land trust lands that support the city's citizenship. Worse off, the city already allocated $130,000 earlier this year to the incentive program, which now can hardly be utilized. My hope is that our city staff can find a solution to allow the incentive program to function as it did, as starter homes are a direct benefit for the city itself. When we have momentum, we can sprint to the finish line. If we slow our momentum, then it takes twice the resources to get back up to speed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Jill Stevenson?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members, you're probably getting tired of seeing me up here, but I sincerely believe, as many climate scientists do, that the most important, all-encompassing issue of our time is the human-caused climate crisis that we are in. We must address the major causes: our overuse of fossil fuels, agricultural abuses, human overpopulation of our planet, just to name a few. We must work to mitigate extreme, devastating weather events, social injustice, pushing other life forms toward extinction, and on and on. In updating the Flagstaff Regional Plan, I would hope every aspect would be judged according to its climate impact. And if we are indeed aiming for climate neutrality by 2030, then every decision that the City Council makes should be evaluated in terms of its impact on this goal. If we don't take climate change seriously, it will be too late for future life on Earth. I'm not trying to talk gloom and doom, just reality, and we can do something about it. In fact, you folks have power. You can set the standard for the Southwest. Be a good example. Thank you.
Thank you. Haley Reynolds?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Haley Reynolds with City of Flagstaff Pros, here with Faith and Manny with the Downtown Business Alliance to invite you all to Flagstaff's Winter Wonderland Holiday Tree Lighting on December 2nd, a city signature event. You are all welcome to join in the festivities beginning at 2 p.m., hot cocoa, crafts, music, and more, and then ride on the fire truck with Santa Claus to light our new Christmas or holiday tree. Do you guys have anything to add? We hope to see you there, and we'll follow it up with an email.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving down, item number 5, review of, I don't see any online public participation either. Moving down to item number 5, review of draft agenda for November 21st, 2023 City Council meeting. Council, are there any questions, comments, or concerns about the draft agenda? I don't see any online either. Okay, so then we are moving down to item number 6, which is the Flagstaff Shelter Services update. And I see that we have Ross here as well as several board members. Welcome, hello.
Anytime technology faculties are about fall apart a little bit. Hopefully that doesn't start moving on its own. Good afternoon. My name is Ross Schaefer, and I am the Executive Director of Flagstaff Shelter Services. It's good to see each of you. Thank you for having me, Mayor Daggett, Vice Mayor Aslan, and the members of council and city staff. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've had opportunities to speak with council over the years, but it has been a while, so I appreciate the opportunity. The mission of Flagstaff Shelter Services is to provide people experiencing homelessness with emergency shelter and the tools to achieve housing stability, regardless of their faith, sobriety, and mental health. And while our program is the largest in northern Arizona for people experiencing homelessness when it comes to shelter and housing, and one of the largest in the state, unfortunately, the need is not decreasing. A 2020 study at the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that nationally, for every $100 increase in the median rent was associated with a 9% increase in homelessness in communities. Who we serve. At FSS, we're proud to be a low-barrier shelter. We provide safe shelter and housing-based evidence-based housing services to anyone in need, and many of whom are turned away in other organizations. Over the past year, we have served over 94,000 bed nights to about 2,000 unique individuals in our community. 400 older adults. We know we are seeing a significant rise in older adults among people experiencing homelessness that have fixed incomes and are not going to be able to get into rental units in our communities without help. This number is inaccurate. It's not 188 families, it's 188 members of families being served specifically through the Crown, which we will talk about momentarily. You can see the breakdown of the percentages of folks that we are seeing come through our doors. Almost 40% of our folks are Indigenous. And, you know, really what I'll talk about a little bit later in our presentation is working on therapeutic and holistic approaches to the work that we are doing to make sure that they are rooted in equity so that the people coming through our doors are able to receive services from, one, people that look like them, two, that our policies and procedures are rooted in equitable practices that people can really feel like they are being heard and received in a welcoming way regardless of how they come to us. We see that, not on this presentation, but close to 20% of our population are veterans. Many of the people we serve are experiencing or have experienced domestic or sexual violence, and 13% of the people we serve on a daily basis are chronically homeless, which means that they have experienced homelessness for at least 12 months in their lifetime. So the locations. You've heard a lot about what we are doing and where we are doing it. We still have Huntington, which is the congregate shelter located on the east side of town with approximately 186 beds each night. Unfortunately, we stay pretty close to full. That's an unfortunate reality of where we are. That certainly increases as the weather or the stakes become higher as the weather turns colder in the wintertime to make sure that people are not left in an exposure setting. Huntington continues to be really the physical front door for people experiencing homelessness in our community that have nowhere else to go. It's truly the most vulnerable people on the street, our neighbors, this is where they can come regardless of what they've got going on. While I wish that this was not the location that's truly the heart of our organization, I believe it is necessary for a healthy community to have an emergency response for people that might be facing homelessness. We are working on training our staff up so that every person coming in is working with someone who has trauma-informed care training, that they can de-escalate right on scene, and that they've all been through physical and mental health first aid training, so that we are dealing with situations as they come in ways that are, again, therapeutic, and that people can get in and get out. Our true vision is that emergency shelter might have to happen tonight, but that we want to be talking about housing tomorrow, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I'm also really excited to say that we are forging a new partnership with the Flagstaff PD. That has been something that over the years, it is a relationship that is necessary, that we have a lot of work to do, but we have been meeting with PD, with leadership at PD, to talk about how can we do more work with you all coming in less of an enforcement way and more of a relationship way in pursuit of reduction of consistent issues, enforcement issues, working in partnership with the CARES team through Taros to make sure that there's a warm handoff if people are getting picked up in the community, that they can come to us and immediately have a response there. In the left-hand corner, you can see a picture of the Crown, which many of you have been out to tour. This building is in direct response to our innovative and, in my opinion, life-saving work during COVID, which was getting people out of congregate shelter and into non-congregate settings. So one, they could heal if they were suffering from COVID, but also two, that truly you can't talk about public health if you're not talking about housing. The Crown has been full since April 17th, 2022. There are 58 units. Predominantly right now, the building sees senior citizens, medically vulnerable, families, and then there is a small section of rooms still dedicated to people experiencing homelessness that are also dealing with COVID. So we are still our community's response for people that have these medical situations where they need to come in and get out of a congregate setting and get healthy. As we shift into the Lantern, which I'll talk about in a moment, this program at the Crown will become almost exclusively families. Because our organization serves people from every walk of life, that often means we are serving people that have direct interface with criminal justice and can't be in an environment where there might be minor children. And so the Crown really is this safe space for families to be. 58 units of family shelter in this community. I don't know if you understand the impact of that. There is no, other than 3 units that Catholic Charity operates, there is no low barrier shelter in this community, and now we're bringing 58 units on. So we really are responding to the family homelessness need in our community without barrier in this meaningful way. It's also really beautiful. If you go over there, you're going to have an experience that is not like another. And I've been doing this work for close to 2 decades, and I can tell you that my DNA feels at peace when I am there. It's just a really beautiful thing that happens when you get people housed and you can see it in this large-scale, meaningful way. In the first year of being there, close to 30% of our population that live there have self-resolved into permanent housing of their own. Let me say that again. 30% of the people that were in this space that were the hardest to serve moving into the Crown. This is not a situation where we pulled super easy people to serve and put them there to have great outcomes. We put very high acuity folks into the Crown that needed strong services, and just by being surrounded by their own space and their own shower and being in this space, they've been able to reduce the number of instances within our community going to the ER. We're in the process of working with NAU right now to really be able to drill down those numbers, which I'll be delighted to report back to you when we get those facts. So the Crown, in my opinion, is this, I think I've referred to it to you all before, as a love letter to COVID and to our community in this way that really speaks to, in my opinion, an incredible approach to getting people out of a congregate setting and then kind of on their way. We also have housing case management that is in space. Everything you can get at Huntington, you can get at the Crown, and we'll talk about the services in just a minute. The Lantern, this building on the right, I'm really excited to say that we just secured funding through the Home Matters project to replace the railings. You can see, and you could probably feel if you went up on the fourth story right now of that building, that if you gave one good hard kick, that railing would come down. And so nobody is moving into that building until those are replaced. So I am thrilled to tell you that that process is moving, and my hope is that by the end of the calendar year, we will start moving people into that building, if not shortly thereafter. So that's 103 units. Specifically for singles in our community, my running joke is that this is going to be the singles hotel, and maybe there'll be like a story of love that happens there as well, Netflix special maybe. Hopefully that's coming to you soon. The one other thing I wanted to tell you is that we are in the process with the city and our community to move the Crown into historic preservation with the help of a number of people. This could potentially be on the National Registry as a community spot that would open us up to other funding opportunities. Our intention is to keep the integrity of that building. In a lot of communities, when it's not done right and the fidelity to these programs is not there, they can be a blight on a community. In fact, I think they are a shining star for our community in many, many ways, and this is just one of them. Right now, the Lantern, already in partnership with Mountain Line and ADOT, already has a bus stop in front of it, which is new. So that's really exciting in terms of transportation. We are working currently with ADOT to try to get a bus stop in front of the Crown. That's a little bit of a slower process because it is Route 66, but that's where we're headed with that for transportation. So in terms of our service, we are so much more than emergency shelter. I know you all know that. 75% of our budget goes to emergency shelter, but I think the real heartbeat of our work is housing, because the answer to homelessness is housing, right? It seems simple, but somehow we get pretty lost sometimes with it. We provide essential life-saving emergency shelter in all of our programs with our overall goal that we are moving people into permanent housing as quickly as possible. 24/7 shelter, 365 days a year. We have day services happening. You do not have to access emergency shelter to access day services where you can get a shower, meal services provided by the Flagstaff Family Food Center. We have a clothing closet, hygiene supplies, diversion and prevention, which I think is frankly some of the most exciting part of this work, which we'll talk about. We are 50% of the front door coordinated entry access point. So if you are experiencing homelessness in this community, you can come to Flagstaff or Flagstaff Shelter Services or Catholic Charities and receive a direct meeting with a trained professional to talk you through what the best next resource, whether it's us or whether it is Nation's Finest or Catholic Charities, all the other amazing programs in our community, you can get access through Front Door, which we share that responsibility with Catholic Charities to operate. We are an innovator when it comes to housing case management and our housing programs, believing that truly that we should get people housed first and then provide wraparound services to keep them in place, that people don't need to be trained to live in a home and that they don't need lengthy 2-year programs to learn how to be housed, that fundamentally if you get people housed first, you can work easier to help keep them there because people fundamentally do better. We operate a multitude of programs around that. That's pretty nuanced. I won't go super into that, but really as long as you know that we want to get people housed as quickly as possible, that's the big thing you need to know. At each location that I showed you, we have on-site connections to physical, behavioral, and mental health providers and resources that's culturally appropriate. So NACA, the Guidance Center, Southwest Behavioral, North Country Healthcare, just to name a few, are on-site multiple times a week at each of these locations and will be at the Lantern as well. It is a true partnership to get this done. One of the things that I'm most proud of in my professional career is the incredible investment that our organization has made in equity work. And I can tell you right now that as a provider that serves anywhere from 40 to 60% Indigenous folks, it is a problem that we don't see 40 to 60% of our outcome stories coming out of our larger community that are Indigenous, especially in this community where we know we have major access issues. And so thankfully, the board of directors went on this journey with our staff. We are in a 15-month process with a nationally recognized facilitator and organization called Arc for Justice to really do the deep dive, scary and curious work of getting at where inequity lies in our community and how we work to overcome that. It looks like auditing our policies and procedures, our hiring practices, everything to sitting down and listening sessions with our clients to say, what's your experience here? Tell us about it, and then to learn from it and develop weekly race equity work groups that are made up of compensated clients, right? So people we are investing, saying, we need your opinion so badly, and it is so important to our work that we want to compensate you for being here, just like we're compensating employees to be in this conversation. So I really believe that, that this is incredibly important work. I think it's brave, frankly, because it's not easy, but I also think it's so worth it because finding where these places of inequity issues lie is really how we get to the heart of the larger community and structural issues around homelessness and poverty in our community, and I think we are ready to be a leader in that work. These are real pictures of real people involved in our organization. Every picture we have is one of a person who has a story. And, you know, I think that it's really important that while I couldn't bring all of them here with us, I think it's important to see that each of these folks, one, wanted to tell their story and their quotes, and I can give you lots of information on that, but really that it's a story of hope that our organization is after. And the work is not simple. I can tell you that I have seen harder things in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, than I have ever experienced in my life. The increase in fentanyl use among our population speaks directly to the injustice and issues that exist nationwide right now. So the number of Narcan administration that my staff has had to complete, the level of violence, human trafficking, it is not okay, and it is something that we have to be in active pursuit to figure out because it's not getting easier, right? Like, I'm not here to paint the sunny picture of everything is great, we've got these programs. I'm here to paint the reality that I often think, you know, my intention is not to weaponize this group of humans, because I think talking about fentanyl in front of city council is not always the way that you tug on the heartstrings. But I think the reality is that we can't get past this kind of thing without talking how it is directly related to housing in our community and how it is directly related to rent rising and access to getting people home. So I think what I mostly wanted to say to you is that we need a renaissance. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now I'm on the Governor's Housing and Homelessness Interagency Council. I'm the one representative from Northern Arizona, and I'm proud to do that and talk about what's happening up here. And I'm the chair of the working group for the Innovations and Best Practice Council that serves right up underneath that. And I think the exciting thing is what we're talking about is that in our community, innovations are happening here. But this needs to be a multi-pronged approach. It doesn't just look like hotels. It doesn't just look like emergency shelter or rapid rehousing or any of the things in our tool belt that we knew how to do pre-COVID, because it is post-COVID and it is a different world. People are experiencing crisis in a way that I have never seen. And so we need a multi-pronged approach that leans heavily on diversion and prevention. And so when I talk about that, I'm talking about the client that I've told some of you about that's staying in the shelter right now, and she's been there so much longer than I'm comfortable even sharing on a microphone. But I can tell you, she has a housing opportunity in an assisted living situation because of her disability, and she won't go because she doesn't want to lose her storage unit. that she's paying $250 a month for. So having an approach where we have funding that talks to our community in a way that doesn't look like the historic plan of home ownership or of what we might think is important, but instead having funding that says, I can pay your storage unit. Go take that unit and let's get you out of shelter so you don't die here. I think we need a renaissance in the way that we think about homelessness and housing in our community, and I believe Flagstaff Shelter Services is the organization to help lead that charge with your support, with your help, and with your guidance. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to you here today. I want to thank you for your continued support of FSS, a front door of our community, and what I believe needs to be a housing comeback story. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. That was a great presentation, and I appreciate ending on these photos to remind us about the humans that we are talking about when we're talking about the support of these different types of programs. We do have several questions from council members, and I will start with Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ross, for that presentation. I'll mirror the mayor's comments there, and I really appreciate you ending on the slide with pictures and sharing the story of the people who are being served by shelter services. I work with you on a more direct level in a couple different capacities, so I've heard a lot of this in the past, and I apologize, I'm on a flight right now, so I'm trying to hurry through my comments and questions before we take off. But I really wanted to take a moment to just ask Ross what the unspoken question or need is from the shelter services. What is or what does that housing renaissance look like in terms of us meaningfully partnering with this agency to provide that gateway to housing opportunity that you're working towards? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember House. I think I heard the part about the unspoken piece, but there was something after I couldn't understand.
Councilmember House, you asked about the unspoken piece and how we can more effectively partner with Flagstaff Shelter Services and other organizations to help solve some of these problems. Does that?
Yes.
Yes?
Yep, you got it.
Thank you.
Nice work. Okay. Yeah, you know, I think that there are a number of unspoken pieces. I mean, I think that it is a true community crisis that we need to be talking about in a way that sort of sets aside some of the bias or you know, where people bring their own kind of stuff to the table. I would say that, you know, to be honest with you, for us to be able to do the kinds of things we're talking about, what I'm talking about in terms of reviving the way that we think about this problem, we're talking about for every person that our organization permanently houses, we see 2 new people come into the shelter. So, that's not because we're building it and so they'll come. That's not because of anything except for what I just shared with you, which is rents are on the rise and it didn't get easier for people that were already down and out. Like if COVID was hard for me, it was really hard for people on the fringe. And so I think what we have to be talking about is solutions that don't look like the way we've always thought about doing things. And I think that is part of bringing the Housing Commission further into it. I think it's part of being able to continue to talk about how we're using the housing bond, how we're using funds that come into our community specific for shelter and unsheltered folks, and getting past what feels like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to fund everybody, and really start looking at numbers, really start looking at outcomes. I do think that that's really important, and I know that that doesn't always make me, you know, the most popular among the Hunger Games of nonprofits, but I do think that we have to be talking about if we really care, If we really want to say this is a crisis, then we have to start talking in an innovative way and thinking about funding in a different capacity than we have in the past. And that's on everybody, including myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Russ, thank you for your continued work at the shelter. Man, just since I've been there, you've just really expanded the services, and I really appreciate that. I have a
Thank you.
Large heart for our in-shelter population. And my stay there, not staying there, but when I was working there, really opened my eyes to the challenges of our unsheltered is not a one-size-fits-all.
That's right.
We have people that have challenges with substance and alcohol abuse, mental health, combinations of some. Some are left on their doorsteps because we're in the Y of the 17 and 40. So thank you for just continuing your energy and efforts to address this issue that will never go away, unfortunately, I think. A couple of questions, though. When I was last there, the capacity, I think, was 110, but you have since built a mezzanine of some sort. What is the capacity at Huntington?
186.
Ooh.
So, yes.
And I hope I'm under the statute of limitations to confess that when I was there during the winter months, I frequently went over the maximum persons allowed in the shelter to about 125, so I'm glad that you have the capacity of 186. I was curious, though, and I have a handful of questions, but one of the things that I experienced when I was working there was there's a lot of transient unsheltered. Do you do, on your intake, are you capturing how many people are from northern Arizona versus how many people are coming from other locations? I frequently remember, fielding phone calls of people saying, I'm in California, I'm, in Utah, do you have a bed available for me in a couple of days? So do you guys track that?
Yes, so there's a few different, and thank you for your question and for your thoughts. And I would say we capture it in a few different ways. So one, at front door. So if people are coming through the coordinated entry, which you're not required to do to stay in shelter. So I don't want to confuse those two. If you're coming through to that piece, we're capturing that information where you come from. In our homeless management information system, which we, as you know, participate in, and all of our information is tracked that way, we ask a question of where you're coming from. Certainly that's an inaccurate number, probably percentage-wise, of what people tell us, but we work really hard to have an A rating with the Department of Housing to make sure that we're getting as much information as possible when people come in. It's how we track recidivism. It's how we can talk about really the next steps for folks, but it's imperfect. There is the January point in time count, which is also deeply flawed in my opinion, and I think largely recognized as a tool that gets us close to what our numbers look like, but not certainly not what looks equitable and really a full assessment of what your community is dealing with. Our unsheltered numbers are not incredibly high based on that count, anywhere between 40 and 80 folks per year. So that's a lot of people that are sleeping outside, don't get me wrong. One is too many. But 40 to 80 folks, when you start talking about the 600 people in our community outside of that are experiencing homelessness, and how our organization is serving close to 2/3 of those folks, it's really, it's my point in saying all of that is we're tracking where they come from at that point, unsheltered or in shelter, through the point in time count. And a number of years ago, we asked the question, do you spend the same place in the summer that you spend in the winter? 80% of the people that responded said, I'm here in the summer and in the winter. These are our neighbors. So I think there's certainly people that are coming from different places. If I get a phone call from somebody in California or New York saying, I want to come to Arizona because it's real warm there, my first reaction is, please don't. Please don't, because it's real hard to be without a home here.
Yes, I think I said the same things, so thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about the Crown and the Lantern. Now, you had, in your presentation, you had said that this was mainly for families. I think that's fabulous. I thought I had read somewhere that when you first was able to purchase the Crown, it was going to be for permanent supportive housing. Is that correct, or did I misread that?
No, so it's part of the funding requirement. So the Arizona Department of Housing helped fund that project almost in its entirety with partnership with the Forest Highlands Foundation. And so the funding has a 5-year sort of note to it to say you have to function either as emergency shelter or transitional shelter or bridge housing, nuanced, but in those first 5 years, and then after that you can function in the way you want to function. So I think the intention is that this long term, we want to pivot to where our community needs us and be nimble in that way, and I think being able to forecast at this point almost 3 years from now feels hard, but I can tell you that we have an active capital campaign right now happening to restore much of the property so that it could function in that way, kitchenettes and all that kind of stuff. And it's getting a new roof as of today.
Yay, yay. So the Lantern, what's it, 3 stories?
4 and a half.
And for singles mainly.
Yep.
Just curious, because I live in that space too, the security for that. My little nonprofit is 1 stories and a fraction of the size, and it's a challenge for sure.
Sure. Yeah, come see the Crown. I think you'll
to.
be delighted to see how when it's trained and staffed properly, what you can really do. And just a reminder that for the first year of COVID, we were operating in 3 different hotels, fully staffed, that largely the community didn't know we were in. So I think it does speak to the beauty of what happens, as you know, when folks get housed. So yes, that'll be secure. It will be all of those things, but mostly it'll be trained, staffed with trained professionals.
And I wanted to make the comment on the storage. I love that you said that because that was a learning experience. That is such an important possession, if you will.
That's right.
For our unsheltered. That's their hold on reality, that they had something that can hold on to their belongings and not be, drug around. So I appreciated your saying that. So let's see, I just want to make sure I went over everything. Oh, length of stay. So you're still running as a shelter on all 3 properties. Is there used to be a 6-month length. Has that changed or?
So there's no length of stay for any of our programs except mentioning that part with the Department of Housing having the note on that first 5 years. So the building is outright paid for, but we have to continue to report our progress and making sure that we're staying within the bounds of that contract. And so that to be functioning as an emergency or a transitional shelter does have a 2-year limit. So at that 2-year limit for us, we'll be thinking about, okay, what's happening with this person? Where are they going? Like I said, right now at the Crown, this is largely families, senior citizens, and medically vulnerable. So we're moving a lot of people through, but keeping an eye on a 2-year mark for people that are coming up close to that, because that's the timeline for that first 5 years.
Thank you very much, Ross.
Yes, great questions. Thank you, Councilmember Matthews.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember McCarthy?
Hi, Ross. I'd just like to say that over the last couple of years, you've had to travel down a difficult road. And some of that came from people that have sat up here, I have to admit. Not me, but but I just want to say thank you so much. I would like to think the rest of this council really does appreciate the work that you do. And I'll just leave it at that. We do appreciate the work you do. It's very important work. And I'm really glad to say that you kind of have an open-minded about, okay, we need to change approaches from time to time to make it continue to work, to make it work better. So again, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Vice Mayor and then Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy. I agree with you. I think we do appreciate the work you do. I think it's important that we show that we appreciate it and not just say that we do. So more on that later. A question for you right now. You mentioned barrierless access. And while I think I can intuitively understand what that means, I'm wondering if I'd like to invite you to explain that to me in a bit more detail, and also why that's meaningful and important in your work.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Absolutely. So, to be honest with you, like I said, I've been doing this work for 2 decades. I've seen a lot of iterations of programs across the country that make it real hard for people to thrive in the environment that we're offering, right? So it's creating a program that works for us, but maybe doesn't actually work for the people that need it. And so low barrier or no barrier shelter looks like allowing people who are intoxicated to sleep in your shelter tonight. We don't allow people to bring in alcohol, but we will allow you to come in if you are intoxicated. And the reality is, we really believe that just because you've had a drink doesn't mean you don't deserve to live through the night. So coming in intoxicated, if that's the case, mental illness, we don't require that you participate in a faith-based service. Really it looks like anything you might have going on, it's okay, you can still come in. And there are very few exceptions to that. It has to get really close down to a PD call with safety on the line for us to say, you know what? This isn't going to work tonight. Let's try to find another solution. And I tell you that my staff will call me at 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, this thing happened. What do we do? And we are doing everything we possibly can to make sure the answer is no, they can't come. It looks like sometimes late check-ins. So, you may wonder if you drive up to the shelter tonight at 9 p.m. why someone's outside and they say, I can't get in. Well, it might be because they were in earlier and they caused a fight. And if they come in at 10 o'clock when everybody's resting, we've taken some of the obstacles out of the way to get through the night safely. Believe me, our last option is saying, you can't stay here, because we know what happens in Flagstaff, especially at this time of year when people don't stay. So at this point, 2 phone calls have to be made to a supervisor and to me if we're going to say you can't be here. And I will challenge it all day long, because I do not want to be on the tail end of a conversation tomorrow about why someone didn't survive the night. So when I talk about barriers, it looks like letting animals in. It looks like if somebody comes with a dog, they come in. And we work through it. If the dog is causing a massive scene, we call the Humane Society and see if they can help us with a kennel. So it's really looking at the unique individuals and saying, we're not going to make it hard for you to come in and sleep here. It's hard enough. That's really, I think, what No Barrier is about. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris?
Yes, and thank you. I am so sorry, Roz, that I have to talk to you like this and you not see me. Unfortunately, I'm just not in that situation where I can do any better. So part of me kind of understands people that might be in different situations, but not that I'm comparing mine to theirs, because I'm not, but I am sensitive to that. Thank you also for the work that you do in our community. I'm sure that all of us, at least I know I sleep a little bit easier at night knowing that there may be a place where people can go to get out of the cold. I'm in Wisconsin right now and it's cold outside, and it's about as cold here as it is in Flagstaff about this time of the year. The question that I had, and I have a couple of them. So I heard very haphazardly about the issue with the 5-year lease or funding that you receive for the building. And so I just want you to explain that to me a little bit more, because I don't know if I really understand that. And the end to my question is that when that time is up, do shelter services own the building and they can keep it and use it as they see fit? Is it property that they can sell? And if so, are there any restrictions on it? So it's some of that kind of stuff that I'm wanting to know a little bit more about.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris, and I appreciate what you said about sleeping easier at night. I do as well. Thank you for saying that. In terms of the 5-year lease, it's not a lease, but it's a 5-year commitment to the Department of Housing that we will use the building as we said we would in our application. So we do report quarterly to them that our organization is serving people in this way, and they look at our HMIS through the Homeless Management Information System data to be able to see that we are keeping with the fidelity of our commitment and being strong stewards of the dollars that we have received. At the end of that 5 years, the building can function, but we are under obligation to not sell the building and to move forward with it in perpetuity with our commitment to the organization and those we serve. It can function, though, as a longer-term potential permanent housing option for people. And again, that remains to be slightly unseen, although I do think that it will look like longer-term shelter, at least for folks, without restriction. So it won't ever look like transitional shelter with those program requirements, but it might not look like leased housing either. Does that help?
Yes, a little bit. So let me just go a little bit first. So I guess the bottom line is that it stays as one of your properties, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you would not sell that to an organization for some other use, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That answers that question, and thank you for that clarification. My next question is more related to, I guess I want to just kind of pick your brain a little bit, or ask you to just kind of do a what if, or I'm not even sure if it's called a what if. So we have a limited amount of resources in the city to help just a lot of different programs that need resources in terms of housing. And yes, we have a housing emergency. We've declared it. We need to get serious about it. It's just not unsheltered. It's, or unhoused. It's, people that are living 2 and 3 and 4 people in an apartment, 2 to a bedroom or more, for, a whole bunch of different living situations. And we're trying to help all those groups to deal with our housing emergency. And not trying to put you on the spot, but maybe I am. So, I guess I just want people to be upfront and honest. So how should we divide this money up? Where are our priorities? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and
No,
I'm not
it's
trying to
okay.
be mean or nasty or anything.
I don't think any of that. I do want to make sure I understand. Are you asking where my priorities are, or where I hope council's priorities are, or maybe
When
that's
I
the same
say
thing?
when I say our priorities, we're all in this together, and we cannot do this unless we're all in it together. So that means you and everybody else sitting in the audience, everybody sitting on the dais. So how are we going to divide up those resources, or how should we be thinking about how we divide up those resources? Because keep in mind that housing is just not for our unhoused or our unsheltered. Our housing crisis is not about just one group, okay? It's about a whole bunch of people. And yes, people who have the potential of maybe being on the street, that's critical. So don't hear me saying that it's not. But also hear me saying that we also have to see if we can try and prevent people from getting on the street too. So just your ideas. I'm not
Sure.
holding.
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate the question, and it's certainly a complex one that I know that we all grapple with in many ways.
Yeah.
Personally, I feel like this issue requires, just like you're saying, there is not one size fits all. And I think that this conversation can very clearly talk about the tools to get there, right? Whether it's diversion or prevention or emergency shelter or workforce housing or whatever the tools are. But I think what we have to do is get very clear about what we have coming into our community resource-wise, and then prioritize that. I think looking at the data, looking at numbers and outcomes and the math of it all, in my opinion, is the only way to be talking about resources coming in. I do not think we should be talking about things that don't look like, does this equal shelter or housing? And if, in my opinion, if it does not check the yes box on that, we should not be talking about it right now. It is too much of a crisis. One person housed, 2 people homeless every day. So I think that, I don't know the answer. I think that diversion and prevention are 100% a part of this conversation. And when I say diversion, I mean people that are about to become into the system, that are about to use precious resources in a shelter setting. And how do we say, you know what, maybe we used to require a year's lease with this funding, but maybe we need to talk about helping this person stay in their brother's house altogether, so that they're not getting evicted from there and needing to find a new lease that frankly they're probably not going to be able to afford up front. I think it's about thinking about a larger term perspective. There's really exciting work happening at the state level with this, and I think that we can bring that innovation here very easily. Flagstaff is remarkable in that way, but I do think when we talk about money and resources, we have to talk about the end game, which is shelter or housing, in my opinion, and we can't be talking about services that aren't going to equal that.
Okay. I think I'll just stop right there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And thank you, Ross. I just have a couple of questions. If a person finds themselves needing shelter for the night, what are the various ways that they can make their way to the shelter? You know, people who can't take the bus, or just what are all the ways that someone can get to the shelter?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mayor. We are heading into the cold season, and so one of the most exciting partnerships I think we offer into the community, which is relatively new in the last, I would say this will be the 3rd year going into it, is a partnership through Care First that allows us to be able to, if you call, so you, Mayor, or any member of the audience can pick up the phone if they communicate with someone who needs to get to shelter and wants to come to shelter, we can send a taxi to go pick them up. That is specific to evening and overnight in the winter. So we'll be putting information out about that, and we'll certainly make sure that the city knows about that at that time. We're pretty much there at the place where people could call. But basically, if you see someone, say something. That doesn't just mean you drive by the Taco Bell and you say, that person looks homeless, I'll call the shelter. That's not really how this works, but it does say, if you are comfortable talking to them and saying, hey, do you want to get to shelter? And they do, you can call us and we'll go pick them up. The other piece to it is that you can call the non-emergency line. They want to make sure that that people get inside in the winter and that we don't have exposure deaths. So I would just encourage you to, if you see someone that might need help, let's talk it through. You can always call the shelter, and we can have that dialogue. We certainly have other partnerships to get there. I think that's one of the most important ones because we want to make sure people get out of the cold. Making sure that people know about Front Door and that they can get to us in a sooner capacity. All of those things are how we want to talk about. Let's not leave anybody out on the street that doesn't know where to go, or that kind of thing.
And when you say front door, I forgot how you just put it, but you're saying before they find themselves without shelter, contact Front Door because there might be help available.
Absolutely. We do have access to prevention resources. It is much, much, much cheaper for everyone else, and obviously not to mention better for the family or the household that might be evicted if we can keep people in place rather than seeing them in our system and then need to rehouse them. So it's not an endless pot, but it is a chance for us to try to catch people before they get to a place where they need a different kind of service intervention.
And you've been particularly successful in addressing needs in the community and pivoting on a dime and really kind of being fluid in terms of addressing the real needs of the community. And I know also from presentations that you're able to give us very specific data about the people you serve and how money is used, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why you've been so successful. Can you tell me about your data gathering and systems and kind of what your staff has in mind when they are thinking about collecting data from individuals who come in contact with your services?
Sure, that's a great question, Mayor. We have a commitment to our funders, both publicly and privately, that we are going to take very seriously the information that we need to be gathering on folks to be able to talk about solutions, right? So again, I've mentioned the Homeless Management Information System. That is a national database that is used among service providers that receive levels of public funding, right? So like you're pretty much required to be a part of that without exception if you are a part of a larger system. And there are certainly cases where like domestic violence partners don't use HMIS in the same way or even at all because of confidentiality and making sure that people can remain anonymous. But this is a system that we essentially pay into. We work with the Department of Housing to make sure that that each staff member that comes in is trained on how to use it, and that we hold that responsibility at with just complete training and candor. So I think that most of the agencies you guys know about in our community also use HMIS, and so it is a way for us to speak the same language even if our programs do not. And so that's a way for us to capture information, to really get to the bottom of how are we serving people? Are they coming back in? What was their housing placement when they left, right? So we have to talk about when they left our program, did they go into permanent housing? Are they back on the streets? What's happening there? And so that's a great way for us to be able to talk about the folks we serve and also keep with the authenticity of our programs and really be able to have that. We also are audited by every person under the sun at any given time and participate in a single audit annually. So I think our organization continues to strive to make sure that whatever we say we're doing, and it's not always there. We have to be able to talk about that and figure out where the weaknesses are and how we can pivot to make sure. I mean, a number of years ago, I virtually stood in front of you and gave a presentation, and one of the largest conversations was, do people feel comfortable racially coming to your shelter? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that we've spent $100,000 over the last number of years getting to the bottom of that because we believe wholeheartedly that everyone in this community deserves to have a safe night's sleep. So I think that that's what we use the data for. We use it to talk about, is our organization doing what we said we would do, and how do people get to us in a way that that we can talk about housing in a long-term way.
Thank you. And that raises another question. There's a continuum of care, right? Coconino Continuum of Care. So it's organizations in Coconino County who meet regularly and share all kinds of information. So does that provide a safety net of any kind for individuals in our community? Like, how are we keeping track of people and making sure that they're getting what they need and that they don't fall through the cracks?
So yes, there is the larger system as a whole across the country from the Department of Housing and Urban Development deploys a system around continuums of care. So in Arizona, there are 3 continuums of care. There's Pima County, Maricopa County, and then the balance of state, which is everybody else. And within those, there's communities like Coconino County that have their own little model set up. Funding flows through those continuum of care. So when you talk about the point in time data, when you talk about HMIS, all of that information and funding and resources disseminated through continuums of care. We have bi-monthly meetings. Myself, Cami Rasman with Catholic Charities, and Heather Marcy with Northland Family are the co-chairs of our local coalition. I know that Councilmember Matthews sits on that, and we always have room for more members and to come out and even sit and learn about what's happening, even just for one meeting, I think would be incredibly eye-opening for you. There are close to 80 members that come and go from different organizations, not just homeless services, but housing and food and all of the things that look like a safety net and beyond, right? I think the most time that we see the folks that have fallen through the cracks is when they're getting to Flagstaff Shelter Services, right? So what I would say is the continuum of care does a bang-up job at getting at a lot of these issues before they become a crisis. But the truth is that our community has a crisis system that is housed within the continuum of care. It looks like Front Door, it looks like Catholic Charities Path Outreach Team, and the number of other partners that show up to talk about shelter and housing. And that, I think, is really the way that we get it done. There's really remarkable conversations that happen in that meeting about everything from staff training to vaccine clinics for animals that just happen because we're all trying to get at the same goal, which is a healthier and housed community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to board members for being here and for your hard work on behalf of the organization and your support of the shelter staff. You're all working within a what can be a stressful environment where people's lives are on the line, and I appreciate that you take it so seriously and that you work so hard to do what's best. So thank you.
I would also just like to say thank you to you all for letting us be here and having this opportunity. And our board of directors and our staff are just phenomenal humans that I think are doing the most remarkable work in our community. 70% of our staff and board of directors have lived experience somewhere across the homelessness, housing, mental health, and criminal justice environment. And so we really have people that are ready to walk the walk. I'm so grateful that they came out this evening and that you let us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to make sure no additional questions or comments. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are moving down to item number 7, update on the land availability and suitability study and code analysis project.
Okay, sorry for the delay. All right, while that is firing up, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. So I'm Michelle McNulty, the planning director, and with me this evening is the consultant team on this project, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But also the core project team, which includes Tiffany Antal, Genevieve Perthree, Jennifer Michelson, and a whole host of other staff that have really been integral to this. I know I've been in front of council to give a couple updates, but for those who haven't heard it, or just a refresher, just a reminder that this is a multi-pronged initiative to address critical long-term planning and resiliency's needs by understanding what lands we have available and what are the potentials and barriers for residential development. It's also evaluating all of our development codes and processes through the lens of the City Council's commitments to housing and climate. This is a financial partnership between planning, housing, sustainability, and Mountain Lion, but it's really a highly coordinated with engineering, including development engineering and traffic, fire, building safety, economic vitality, water services, and others. And it's providing that much needed base for a high-level coordination between numerous divisions. This project is an opportunity to demonstrate that the council's two emergencies regarding housing and climate can be balanced. This is about prioritizing our priorities by adjusting development codes so that they move forward our goals and not conflict in a way that no dials move because everything is trying to be turned. This is not a zero-sum game, but we have to be smart about how we guide development so the two issues don't compete. The consultant team is here to give an update on what has been done to date and what are the next steps. And as you listen to this update, please think about what information or data you need to make decisions about code in the future and what aspects of the code or development process have been unclear to you and that we can clarify or provide deeper insight into. The consultant team will probably ask you those questions again, so you don't have to completely remember them, but just to kind of get you thinking. And we look forward to your feedback and answering any questions you might have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reed Stapleton. And I'm going to put this on presentation mode.
Is that view? F5, there we go.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mayor, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Reed Stapleton. I'm the project manager with the consultant team that's working on this project. It's been a great couple of days. Y'all have a beautiful city. We've been spending the last couple of months working with maps and high-level aerial photos and all sorts of GIS data, but there's really no substitute for getting out and seeing the properties and getting a feel for how they look, what the access looks like, what the slope is. So it's been a really interesting couple of days, and we've got one more, so we're looking forward to that as well. So I'm with Dow is the name of my company. We are a civil engineering and land use planning firm. We are primarily focused, while we're the overall consultant managing the overall effort, we're primarily focused on the land availability and site suitability component of this project. There is a parallel effort, substantial one, that we'll be looking at and has begun looking at the city's codes and processes to identify how might they be right-fitted or adjusted to better meet the city's sustainability and housing production goals. I'm joined here with Jamin Kimmel from Cascadia Partners. Cascadia Partners is our consultant partner who's doing the bulk of that code analysis work. And we are also partnering with a couple of firms, I'll note here, GBD Architects, who's really focused more on the building efficiency and mechanical, electrical, plumbing system, that type of kind of techie, wonky, building-specific code work. They'll be looking at that and begun to do some of that work. And then we have Building Community Flagstaff on our team as well. And Renee Redday from Building Community Flagstaff is poised to engage the public more intensively in the coming months as we really start to take a more detailed look at the code. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge a couple of members of the Dow team who are here. Matt Robinson and Kate Silber are in the audience and have been doing a lot of the technical work behind the scenes. And Pauline Ruig from Cascadia Partners is here as well and is Jamin's right hand. So we've got a good team here working to really start to sort these things out. So the agenda of our presentation today, we'll just briefly mention the project purpose. I'm going to speak to the work that's been done on the land availability and site suitability process. And then Jamin will take over and speak to the work that we've been doing and what the process will be when it comes to evaluating the code and the city's processes. So as Michelle alluded to, there are multiple efforts going on with this project. One is to look at what land's available in Flagstaff and what is the development potential of that land and what are the barriers to development. And really the key to that effort and the reason why these things are going in parallel is the idea and the notion that the barriers that we observe with development will illuminate some of these code concepts that we really need to focus on. And so I think it's a smart thing that the city's decided to put these things together, and we're starting to see evidence of where those things may intersect. We're conducting an in-depth analysis of the development codes and processes, looking at the council's commitments to housing and climate action. And then we're looking at what's working and what's not. And we're taking a look at specific projects that have happened in the city and testing some of our code concepts against those to see how they might have potentially changed outcomes. And Jamin can speak a little bit more to that when he takes over the presentation. So for the land availability study, this map indicates the area of our project and where we have looked at the attributes of these properties to understand what sites have the potential to provide housing and what are the potential constraints. So you can see that we've extended that boundary beyond just the city limits. We didn't want to limit it just to the city limits with the understanding that obviously the city's growing and that it will expand in the future into some of these peripheral sites, although that might not be tomorrow. We wanted to make sure that we were looking long-term at what those expansion areas might yield. High-level process for that land availability study is first looking at what sites are vacant and what sites are vacant enough to reasonably conclude that there could be some market potential for them to redevelop. So that's the first tier. From there, we have this sort of macro inventory. We've taken certain GIS factors, certain natural resource screening criteria, overlaid that on those properties to figure out what's the residual area that could potentially be available for housing.
Can I pop in with a quick question?
Absolutely.
So when you're talking about redevelopment, you're not talking about complete redevelopment of a site. You're talking about a site that still has a reasonable amount of vacant land.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yes. And I'll speak a little bit to what those criteria are that we looked at, but that's the idea that just because it may, if you have a 10-acre site that may have a $50,000, a structure that's been assessed at $50,000, there's a reasonable amount of land left over that would be available, and we didn't want to exclude sites like that. So from that sort of net inventory that we established, then we've taken a look at what particular sites really have the potential to move the needle when it comes to providing housing. So what, as we've termed in our process, what are the opportunity sites? And we've been working with city staff to identify what are those sites. And the next stage of our process will be to take a deeper dive into those properties to look at what are the infrastructure needs of those properties that, if filled, could really help kind of move the process forward and make them a little bit more plug and play for development. So when we looked at our overall inventory, obviously the first land use category that we were focused on are lands that are zoned residential. That's kind of the primary focus, obviously. We recognize that the city allows for mixed use in commercial zones, so we wanted to make sure we included commercial zones. And also industrial to a certain degree. There's a certain, although very limited, there's a certain kind of niche residential product that can occur. I know there hasn't been a lot of it, but we looked at that, looked at industrial land as well with that in mind. And also with the idea that that could be some kind of tertiary information that might be helpful for your economic development team to look at and consider when they consider what lands are available for economic development. We also included public land with the idea that there could be properties that could be surplused and available to be offered up into public-private partnerships and other creative ways to participate, for the city to participate or other public agencies to participate in a housing project. So when we looked at, to speak to your question, Mrs. Mayor, we looked at the county assessor attributes for what is vacant, and if there was a assessed value or full cash value of 0 on the property, then it was presumed that there are no structures. Obviously, when it comes to public properties where there's no assessed value, we kind of qualitatively went in there and excluded certain sites. For properties that did register some improvement value, what we did is we looked at some other example projects where buildable land studies have been done, There's a particular example of this in Southwest Washington that we're very familiar with through ongoing planning work that's happening there. But we basically take those sites that have an assessed value on the property, and we look at the sites that have the lowest 10% ratio when it comes to value per acre. And we identified that 10% threshold as really kind of the bright line. Anything that fell below the 10% presumably had a assessed value that was low enough that market pressures could push it into a redevelopment scenario. So that that is how we sort of created a population of sites that were partially vacant. With that, we had an overall inventory and began to take more of a hands-on kind of screening method there, not just looking at what the computer spits out to us as what's available, but doing a more nuanced look, looking at where there are narrow strips of land next to right-of-way that didn't really have adequate depths to really realistically be redeveloped. We looked at obvious mistakes, condo plats and homeowners association tracts that were clearly dedicated to storm or other recreational amenities. We excluded those. And then we went on and we applied some environmental screening. We removed anything that was recognized and mapped as a wetland. We removed stream buffers on 20 feet on either side of the stream. We excluded slopes over 25%, and we also excluded 100-year floodplain. Based on that, then we developed a unconstrained acreage number that gave us an overall total of what lands are available. Part of that screening process, it's really critical in a process like this, is to really lean on local folks who are in the know. And so we leaned heavily on the city staff. They see proposals obviously all the time. They see pre-application requests. So we leaned heavily on them to get their knowledge about where they've seen proposals come in, where they've seen challenges. We also reached out to a developer stakeholder committee. It was a group of about 15 members of the development community to understand what are their insights from where they've gone and done feasibility and due diligence studies, and we've gathered that feedback and have incorporated that, incorporated that into our preliminary inventory. And you can see we had those two discussions with the stakeholders on October 16th and 20th. Those meetings were coupled with a discussion about code challenges, and we gathered a lot of feedback from them on that effort, and that's a lot of detailed feedback that our team is taking and moving forward with, and Jamin's team is in particular. I want to also mention, and I mentioned Renee Redday early in our presentation, she will be taking the lead with stakeholder outreach, so we do plan to engage with the community significantly in the coming months, really starting primarily at the beginning of 24 and going through the end of 24 as we start to have a little bit of, I guess, a better compass for where some of our recommendations are starting to shake out. To gather feedback from the city and from that developer committee or the developer stakeholder committee, we created a hands-on user GIS application. So we provided our preliminary inventory to city staff and to the developer stakeholders to go by each site one by one and click on them and provide direct feedback. So that was a really helpful tool. We received that feedback up until a couple of weeks ago, and that has fed into our process and has allowed us to exclude some sites and also allowed us to develop that inventory, the preliminary inventory of the opportunity sites. So this is our final inventory as it stands right now. And you can see this is the entire study area. So this identifies what the total land area is that was identified as vacant and partially vacant within the overall study area. You can see that when it comes to residential land, that number was cut in about half when you look at what's available just within the city limits. And then This is really just a breakdown to give some perspective on what are the cohorts of sizes of vacant and partially vacant properties, just to give some understanding of scale. This was particularly helpful when we went out to get feedback on what are the opportunity sites. We wanted to push sites out there that, you know, had 2 acres, generally 2 acres or greater, that could really have the opportunity to provide a significant amount of housing. This is just a quick snapshot of what those constrained areas are. So you can see by, you know, a significant margin, the most significant constrained area that was observed on the properties was slopes, steep slopes. 100-year floodplain was up there as well, and then to a much lesser degree, wetlands and stream buffers. This is our preliminary opportunity site list that we are currently working through. We've spent a significant amount of time over the last couple of days working with city staff, going out to these properties, looking to see what additional properties may make sense to add, and if there are other properties that might make sense to take out. So we're still in the process of refining this list, and we expect over the next couple of weeks to really kind of right-size that, make sure that we've got the proper sites in here, and then from that point, we will begin to do that infrastructure analysis. So the next steps for the land availability component of the project, like I said, are to refine that final opportunity site list. At that point, we plan to really dig in and identify what are the infrastructure gaps and provide a summary report that summarizes what those significant infrastructure needs are for those properties. And then we also intend to take the information that we've seen and that we've observed when it comes to constraints and look to ways in which those can inform and possibly lead to code improvements. With that, I'm happy to answer any immediate questions, or we can transition to Jamin.
Questions? Vice Mayor.
Yeah, just real fast. I understand excluding square footage in a floodplain. But why did you guys choose that 100-year threshold as opposed to another number?
Yeah.
You know, and these designations don't mean as much as they used to.
Right.
With climate variability, the indicators of the past no longer predict the future. So answer the question with that in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great point. It's one that we grappled with when we were kicking this off. Where we kind of drew the line in that was if a development proposal came forward, is there a regulatory obstacle, specific regulatory obstacle that would prohibit that from happening? And
like insurance or?
Not necessarily insurance, but could I get that project permitted? And so I'm sure you're speaking to the 500-year floodplain, and that was something that we looked at, we considered. Where we landed on it was that because we want to be true to what a developer would experience if they had a project and wanted to come forward, and whether or not that project would hit a brick wall because of a particular regulatory obstacle, we wanted to primarily focus on regulatory obstacles when it came to the overall inventory. Our recommendation to the city project team when we have requested for input on the opportunity sites is that we do exclude sites like 500-year floodplain, like wildfire risk. There are wildfire risk maps. So our suggestion is when it comes to the overall inventory, rather than sort of presuppose an obstacle that may not really run into a particular regulatory hurdle, let's not exclude that at this point, but when we take that more clinical look at what are the opportunity sites, let's consider that significantly. So that's where we landed on that. And then when it comes to, and I should say, we didn't automatically exclude 100-year floodplain. one of the things we've been doing today is walking around downtown and looking at the sites that will presumably see 100-year floodplain lifted when the Rio de Flag project occurs. So we actually have sites in our preliminary opportunity site list that have already anticipated future FEMA map amendments that will occur after that flood improvement project occurs. So, yeah, a great question. Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. Good to be here with you this afternoon. So my name is Jamin Kimmel. I'm a partner with Cascadia Partners, and as Reed and Michelle mentioned, we're also kind of helping to co-lead this project with a specific focus on the code analysis. And so Cascadia Partners is based in Portland, Oregon, but we actually do quite a bit of work across the Mountain West and in many communities similar to Flagstaff, dealing with some of the housing and climate challenges you're seeing. So we're glad to see this project and really looking forward to digging in. So today the main goal for the update on the code analysis part of the project is really to just give you a preview of the kinds of information and analysis we will be providing in the later stages. And so we're really just in the early stages of beginning to dig into the code and understand all the issues. And so hopefully a good chance for you to start to give us some feedback to influence how we approach this work and what kind of information is most useful, help to answer some questions you may have based on your experience, applying the development code to real projects. We also wanted to share an update on some of the feedback that we've gotten so far from the developer community and some engagement we've done with development community. So as a way to preview some of the issues we'll be looking further into and digging into as we get into the analysis. So starting off with a little overview and us to reflect back on our understanding of the purpose and the goals for this code analysis project. And so we know that affordable housing, sustainability have been long held priorities for this community and really important goals for Flagstaff. But we also know that in recent years that they've become even more urgent priorities, and you've adopted some planning documents that call for some pretty bold and urgent action on your housing, on your kind of twin crises here of housing affordability and resilience and carbon neutrality. And so the kind of understanding we have is that the development code is not your only tool to try to address these crises, but it's a really important one, and it's a really critical tool for you to try to influence the types of development you're getting and what kind of outcomes you're getting from those developments in terms of housing and sustainability. But there's a sense that tool is not really working as intended, and it's not really in full alignment with your policy goals. And there's maybe some reasons why, and I think some stakeholders and the city staff has some intuitions of why that code is not getting you what you want. But really you need a comprehensive analysis to step back and take a look at it and say, why isn't the code getting us what we want, and how could the codes be modified to better deliver on those big policy goals, which are really challenging issues, but hopefully we can make some progress on them. So I mentioned that this is a comprehensive analysis, and so when we say code, we're saying codes in plural, and so we're not just looking at one title of the municipal code or only looking at the zoning code. We are looking at the whole spectrum of codes that affect kinds of development and the development outcomes you get on the ground. And that's a really unique opportunity for a city to take a step back and look at all their codes and how they're working together. So we applaud the city for taking that step. And we're going to be looking, not only are how the codes aligned with and how effectively are they implementing those key policy goals, but how aligned are they with each other and how internally consistent are they? So we want to make sure all those different codes are kind of rowing in the same direction towards your goals. And there's an intuition now that may not be the case in some areas. So getting into a little bit more about our specific approach to this work and how we're going to kind of undertake it. It's a kind of a complex project, so I want to start to get you an understanding of how we're going to approach this. And so the first step is just getting really clear on when we say your policy goals and what specifically do we mean by that. And so working with city staff, we are going through those key planning documents that have been adopted in recent years and ones that are already been adopted previously. So the 10-year housing plan, the carbon neutrality plan, but also the regional plan and how the regional plan is evolving and today. And pulling out what are those key goals in each of those plans that could potentially be addressed by the development code. So what are the goals in those plans that we want the development code to better implement, better move us in the direction of meeting those goals. And so we're identifying kind of a series of policy goals. That'll be our framework. And then what you'll see as we evaluate the different provisions of the different codes, there'll be a clear connection. So if we say that a code standard is a barrier to meeting your goals, we'll be specific about what those policy goals are, because they're nuanced. There's goals around sustainability and resilience. There's goals around energy efficiency in new buildings. There's market rate housing. There's affordable housing. So we want to make sure we're being comprehensive considering all of those goals. And again, just to clarify on the scope of the codes that we're looking at, so it includes all of the sections of the titles of the municipal code that affect development, so ranging from building code to the zoning code, engineering design standards. It also includes looking at some of the technical manuals that also have an impact, some of the standards in those manuals that have an impact on the form of development, the cost of development, and so things like transportation impact analysis and how those are conducted. So how we've organized this work is into kind of 3 phases, and so we did this to make sure that there was enough checkpoints to receive feedback from you all, but also from other stakeholders as we move along and try to incorporate that into our analysis and incorporate that into how we, some of our recommendations. And so the first phase is what we're in now, is just what we're calling a diagnostic. And so the idea here is just to identify what are the problems with the code, what are the most important problems to address. We'll then move into a kind of a concepts phase where we're looking at what are some alternatives to the way we currently use this code, and what are some advantages and disadvantages of some other alternatives. And then we'll move into refining those concepts into some specific recommendations. And so we want to, at the end of this, leave the city with a roadmap for pursuing specific code changes in the future, the clear idea of what are the potential impacts of implementing those code changes, and what can we expect to get out of those as we go forward in the future. So zooming in a little bit on the code diagnostic, which is the phase we're in now. I won't go through this whole graphic because there's a lot to it, but wanted to really just give you a sense of the different kinds of analyses we're doing and the kind of information that you will get in the code diagnostic deliverable. And I'm going to go into some of these in a bit more detail shortly. But really the key message here is that these are all feeding into how we evaluate the code. So in the sense that we're not just looking for reviewing the code itself, we're looking at data on your past development patterns, we're looking at testing some of the impact of potential code changes, and that is all going to be feeding into what are the most important kinds of changes that would move the needle on housing and sustainability. So one of those that I wanted to explain a little bit more that you'll see from us in the future is this idea of a development prototype. And so this is a tool we use often in these kinds of projects, and it's particularly helpful for kind of testing some of the quantitative dimensions in the code. And so, zoning codes and building codes have a lot of standards that say you must have X amount of this area or space or things like that. And all of those have an impact on what kind of development happens, what kind of housing gets built. And so we use these prototype models, which is essentially just, let's think about a hypothetical development that could occur under this set of code standards. So not any specific property or specific location, but use it as a test case for how the code is working today and how it could work in the future. So this is an example from some work we recently did in Missoula, Montana, that gives you kind of an illustration of how this could help you to understand some of the trade-offs in the code. And so the key idea is to kind of rethink some of these standards as levers. So there's different levers you can pull to try to impact the housing and sustainability outcomes you're looking for. And so the question is kind of what levers are going to have the biggest impact on those goals, and what are the most important levers to pull? Sometimes you have to pull multiple of them. And so this is just kind of a series that will show you kind of an example of how we tend to approach that work. And so, this is a typical type of multifamily development that would be possible from this example in Missoula. And so we build a model that how many units can you fit on this typical kind of site, and while still complying with all of those various code standards that impact development. So, in this case, there's a 4-story building. It can fit about 32 units on this site. And then we run that through a financial model to try to estimate how affordable could those units be in that kind of development. And so this is a really key question to getting at how does your code affect the potential affordability of housing that's built in the future. And so taking into account construction costs, the cost of land, all the things that feed into the cost of housing development. And so in this example, the outcome was that you'd have to hit a fairly high rent in order for that project to be economically feasible. So $2,700 per unit was kind of the average that we came up with, which is really only affordable to a fairly high income group in this example from Missoula. So then we take it through a process of pulling some of those levers in the code and saying, how does that impact the kind of development that's possible and those affordability outcomes? And so we pulled several different kinds of levers to test the changes. You can see the impact on this site. It allowed for a significantly higher number of units, so a higher density development on that site. That higher density then translates into being able to spread the cost of development across more units, which enables a developer to provide those units at a lower price point. It's a lower price point. I wouldn't say it's low or affordable to a good segment of the population, but it gives you a sense of how much you can move the needle by changing some of those levers, and what segments of the population you may not be able to reach just with your market rate housing, and you might need other tools to try to reach that segment of the community. So we're looking at those prototypes. We're also looking at actual built projects in Flagstaff. And so this is really helpful for us to better understand how the development review process is working, some other more kind of qualitative issues with the code. And so staff has provided us kind of the full case files on 7 different example projects that are kind of indicative of some of the issues that they tend to experience in the code. We're doing a deeper dive into that to better understand what happened there and how can we kind of improve that in the future.
Excuse me one moment. We have a question from Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Getting back to your levers, I just want to make sure I understand this model right here. You're reducing the unit size down to 500 square feet. Is that how I read that?
Yeah, I kind of breezed over this, maybe it wasn't clear, but yeah, that is actually the minimum land area per unit. So it's actually a measure of the density on the site. And so this has 500 square feet per unit of land area. The units actually in these apartment building are probably more like an average of 800 square feet. But the unit size didn't change when we moved some of those will be tested, the changes.
And then reducing the parking obviously adds more space to build, but in this lever, you've reduced it to less than a half a parking space.
Yeah, this is a pretty significant change from their existing policy.
And so with that, and I haven't dug into it to research it, but I heard noise out like by Timber Skies and stuff that, which is a great project that has reduced parking with the vision of encouraging other modes of transportation. And surrounding neighbors have made comments on different social media sites that property owners are converting to Airbnbs because they're not going to utilize it as their primary home without the parking. So in this study, will you also look at unintended consequences? Because that's also a challenge that we have up here is Airbnbs taking over our available rental spaces. And I just want to be cautionary to not push that movement in that direction, which kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, I think that's a really perfect example of the kind of tensions that you might have in looking at how do you move the needle on some of your housing issues. We know that reducing the amount of parking is required can have a positive impact on the cost of development, the density, but it could have unintended consequences. And certainly we will be looking at both of those in tandem and trying to help the city better understand how the code may balance some of those competing priorities. Okay. So another kind of dimension to this that we're trying to take into account is focusing not just on new housing units that are produced, but how is the code today or potential changes to codes in the future could affect the ability for existing residents to maintain in their current housing. And so looking at would a change in the code actually accelerate some of the market trends and dynamics that lead people to be displaced from their current housing. And so I think it's a really important thing to consider because that can be an unintended consequence of a code change, and particularly if it concentrates development in a neighborhood where there's many populations that are vulnerable to being displaced. And so the first step in that is for us to understand where are those neighborhoods in Flagstaff. And so we've started on a fairly data-driven process to try to identify the neighborhoods that have populations that might be vulnerable to displacement. And we'll use some of that mapping then as a lens to view the current code, potential code changes to say, would that potentially have a disproportionate impact on those neighborhoods? And if so, we want to be careful about that change and think about how do we avoid or mitigate that issue. Okay, turning to some of the feedback we've heard from developers so far, and I present this just to kind of sum up some of the issues we've heard. These are not necessarily our findings of what we consider to be the most important issues with the code to address. Just kind of passing on some of the things we've heard as a way of keeping you up to speed with what we're taking into account. So there's kind of two challenges related to the development review procedure that were commonly brought up by the development community. One was that many projects are required to go through what we call a discretionary approval process. So approval process that requires approval through Planning Commission or City Council, applying kind of having some discretion over what that project looks like, and whether it complies with the code or not. And there's a sense in the development community that more of those projects are becoming before the Planning Commission and City Council than seems necessary. And there's an opportunity for more of those kinds of projects to be reviewed by staff at an administrative level. There's another, related to procedures, another piece of feedback we've heard is that some of the steps in the review procedure even when they're going through a process that's mainly reviewed by staff, some of those steps could be streamlined, and there's steps that maybe unnecessarily delay the process or make it more complex than it needs to be. So we're going to be kind of taking a closer look at those. We heard kind of a common theme on the city's two incentive programs that are really relevant to this project, and so the affordable housing incentives and the residential sustainability incentives. And the common theme basically is there that as the developers look at using those incentives, they take a look at them, but in the most cases, they're finding that the kind of economic benefit of using those incentives doesn't outweigh the cost. And so just from a pure kind of economic perspective, it's hard for them to justify using those incentives if they don't feel like they're getting enough out of it. We heard several comments on resource protection standards. So the resource protection overlay that deals with slopes and floodplain and tree preservation. And one of the kind of thrust of the comments there were that the resource protection is kind of the cumulative impact of those standards on a site that can be most challenging. So if you have slopes and trees on the same site, they combine together to kind of preserve a really significant portion of the site, make it hard to build enough units for a project to be economically feasible. Two different kinds of comments related to some engineering standards, but also related to fire code that deals with access and transportation. So one, requiring streets that may be overly wide, so it has a cost on development, and some requirements associated with egress and ingress and access related to fire safety appear to be somewhat arbitrary. And the idea there is, I think there's reason the developers the sentiment is that there's kind of reasonable alternatives to some of those standards that would achieve a similar goal but would be a lower cost to the development. The high occupancy housing standard, there's standards. One of the things we heard about that set of code is that it seemed to be primarily designed for some of the larger projects and may have the unintended consequence of presenting some barriers to kind of smaller infill projects on smaller sites. And then lastly, we did hear about minimum parking requirements from the development community, and and a general thrust was that the parking minimum ratios that were required by the city resulted in projects that were overparked. They had more parking spaces than were really necessary to make their project work. So again, that's just some of what we're heard. That's what we're going to be digging into more and really looking at it, using our expertise, using staff, and thinking about it from other different angles. These are what the developer community is saying, but we want to make sure we feel like those are the most important barriers in the code and most important issues to address as we move forward in the process. Okay, that is all I have. I think if there was a few discussion questions that that Michelle had posed to you at the beginning of the session, so I'd put those back up there. I'm really just curious to hear your input on our approach so far and what you're hoping to see out of this process.
Council, questions, comments? Councilmember Matthews?
I'm going to just keep sticking on my parking. And I know that Michelle obviously knows this, but I just want to make it, remind everybody that we have a no street parking ordinance from November through or till April 1st. And so that does impact, where some cities can limit their parking. And as people grow into a different mode of transportation, we do have every year, we have a very challenging period of time where it impacts a lot of people. So I want to make sure that that is not ignored, and we factor that in.
Councilmember McCarthy?
Yeah, I think parking is just one example of how we need to think of the trade-offs and the consequences anticipated or not. Well, we need to make them anticipated. But parking, just as an example, yeah, it makes sense to have less parking. You could have more density and blah, blah, blah. Well, that might make sense if you have a very walkable community, which, you know, we're not there yet. We're moving towards that. And the other thing is that since I've been on council, we've gotten a lot of emails about people complaining, especially on the south side. There's no parking down there. And those kids that live down the street, they're parking right in front of my house. So, you know, it isn't a all yes or all no. We have to kind of use a judgment thing, and I think you know that. We need to think of the benefits and the negative side of proposals that we're thinking about. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Sure. Thank you for this. Great discussion. I think it's, I'm really impressed with staff for hiring these consultants and taking the initiative on this difficult conversation. There's a lot in here that I like. There's some things in here that I feel threatened by. I think that's a good space for us to be in. I disagree with the parking conversation so far. I totally agree that it's contextual, but I think we need to be moving in the direction of no minimum parking requirements. So I just want to throw that out there as my seventh of the seven-headed beast up here, thinking a bit differently about those things. I think it's most important to think about no parking requirements where we're trying to achieve high density. That's just going to become part of that helps us gather an actual high density designation in certain places. It makes a lot less sense out at Timber Sky, where people are going to have to be utilizing vehicles to get back and forth. I also think tree preservation is important for the character of our city. Slopes obviously can't entirely be ignored, but I've seen plenty of projects engineer around slopes. I do want to be careful about removing tree preservation requirements too much. We want our city to feel forested. One of my favorite things about Flagstaff is you look out at the city from certain high vantage points and you can't see that it's a town of 75,000 people. Everything is nicely hidden and couched under our pine forest canopy. And we want to be able to preserve that look and the access that we have to open spaces and you know, the wellness aspects of living among the trees without waxing too poetic about it. And yeah, so those are my first initial thoughts about this. There are places in town where we're hoping to achieve a bit of a higher density, and I think those spaces, those areas can be held to a different standard than certain other places. So you know, maybe articulating that a little bit better. What is a high density objective area versus some of these other places? You know, I went back earlier in this presentation. There's really not a lot of parcels in town here. Looks like we get up to 24 maybe total. So I mean, it's easy to identify some of these places where we want to ratchet those levers as much as possible, and some of these other spaces where it's probably less appropriate to do so. I think it's a nuanced conversation, and I think there's a lot of room for us to all be slightly uncomfortable with compromise in terms of how those levers, you know, what they look like in reality when shovels are in the ground.
Speaking to the dedication of Councilmember House, she is currently on an airplane and watching the meeting. And she says that her audio is spotty, and can I ask a question for her? I'd be interested to hear the speaker share more of his thoughts on the parallel wait a minute, the parallel between the concerns regarding reducing parking in development and developers' listening session reporting that current parking minimums are resulting in overparked developments. To me, that seems to suggest a positive impact in reducing parking requirements if our current standards are resulting in overparked developments. Does that make sense to you?
I think I understood. Maybe if I can, summarize, I think what maybe she's pointing out there is that we know that if you're trying to promote a higher density of housing, reducing your minimum parking requirements can have an impact on that. That assumes, though, that the developers actually take advantage of a lower parking requirement, and whether they do that will often depend on their view of whether that's the right amount for their project. They're going to think about the marketability of their project, whether people are going to want to actually live in those units if they have fewer parking spaces available. And so I think that the sentiment that was expressed by at least some of the developers we've talked to is that for their kind of projects, they think that the regulations are requiring too much. And there's an opportunity to kind of right-size the requirements to what the actually market needs, and that we're providing too many spaces. And so that if you reduce the requirements, it may not actually mean that more on-street parking is used or that there's spillover effects on the community. That's the theory that the developers are thinking there. They're overparked because we don't actually need that much. But that's very contextual, and that's one of our goals here is to identify, help to start to identify what are the situations, locations, project types that make the most sense, where those requirements would be right-sized, so we're balancing your goals around housing and also potentially around sustainability, but also some of these issues about neighborhood livability and other issues that could be unintended consequences.
Thank you. And she says that that answers her question. Okay, I've got a couple of things. I think staff knows what the community asks for and what the council asks for. And so I think that this council is open to, if there's an alternative that achieves the goal, but we can go about it a different way, that would achieve some of our other goals. I believe that we all want to hear what those are. And so when we talk about density, it's my understanding that within the city of Flagstaff, we're never talking about high density as it's defined. Am I correct? I mean, what we're really talking about is medium density, but it's higher density than we see now. Because people get scared when they hear high density, and high density is actually much higher than we talk about here locally. So I just wanted to, I guess, make that point for the public, that when we talk about increasing density in some areas, it's increasing it over what we see now, but not necessarily what is actually considered high density. And the parking thing, man, if you can come up with a solution to that, we will put a statue of you in Heritage Square, because it's this double-edged sword, right? We want to be a more walkable, transit-friendly community, and parking in so many instances stands in the way, or parks in the way, of achieving those goals. And you see people not walking or biking or taking transit as much as they would if you already were where you want to be in the future, right? So we're in this area where it's difficult for a lot of us to envision what it could look like in the future. And we see very real concerns expressed by people in certain circumstances when we're talking about parking or, you know, a variety of things that you're grappling with. So, good luck. And no, this is such an important conversation, and one that we've needed to have for a long time. And we want to make sure that our codes are achieving what our community wants, and not having those unintended consequences. And I'm just so glad to see us doing all of this at once and looking at it in a comprehensive fashion, rather than trying to attack one problem, you know, like parking, in absence of everything else. So I'm very hopeful about what this is going to bring about in Flagstaff and the conversations that we can have going forward when you come to us with some recommendations. Councilmember McCarthy.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that. I believe that this analysis is very important, and I absolutely support it. It's kind of falls in line with some things that I've been asking for since I've been on council over 7 years. So anyway, very supportive. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
If I may, Madam Mayor, thank you. Just one final comment from me. There wasn't a lot of in this presentation about carbon neutrality and engineering standards and building codes, and the additional upfront expenses associated with those. I don't know how much your study is going to get into those aspects, but I would just remind you that we are dedicated to carbon neutrality by 2030, and a big part of that is good weatherization and building buildings correctly from the beginning. And while there may be some upfront associated costs with that, I think many of us up here recognize that residents will save money hand over fist in the long term with these upgrades in place from the beginning. And so just bear in mind that I think you have a council that's very supportive of those investments in spite of some of the upfront costs. And as you're tinkering with those levers, I would be very sensitive to messing with that one too much.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Yeah, I just want to follow up to that and kind of tell a quick story. When we bought our house, you know, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I got an A in heat transfer. So I did a little extra insulation in my house, in the walls in particular, and it really didn't cost me. It was just a few hundred extra dollars. Well, what's happened in my neighborhood is my house has never been hot in the summer because I open the windows at night and it's fine. And I've never added an air conditioner. Most of my neighbors who have the standard insulation have all added air conditioners since the houses have been built as an afterthought. So I guess the major point here is that, yes, sometimes it costs a little bit more to build, in this example, a house, but the long-term impact, which is in what Mr. Aslan was saying, is that it substantially reduces the operating costs of the house. So, you know, yes, the cost of building a house is important, but it's also important what the operating costs are. And the secondary effects like, oh, I better add an air conditioning system for thousands of dollars into my system, which costs way more than putting a little bit more insulation in when you're doing. The other thing is, 30 years from now, somebody will still be living in that house. And it's very difficult for them to add insulation at that point. It's very easy to add extra insulation when the house is being built initially. Thank you.
Which reminds me about another point. In terms of the incentives, at the beginning of the meeting, Eric Wolverton from Habitat discussed our housing incentive fund and a way that it was not working for developers who want to do affordable housing. I'm very keen to see what kinds of incentives can we offer in terms of our climate goals and our housing goals that would make a difference and would facilitate developers taking advantage of that. It's, so, any additional questions or comments, anyone? Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to add my 2 cents in, you know, I think that most developers want to get as much bang for their buck when they're building structure, and we have had already some, a couple of projects come forward and asking us to reduce that standard, so I think definitely we have some wiggle room. To the Vice Mayor's point, though, I guess when you do a code change, if we do a code change, it'll be on the backs of the council at the time, or maybe even planning and zoning, to be realistic about, is this developer wanting to develop past, you know, like Timber Sky, and have no parking, which would make it very difficult. I talked to NAU representatives a year ago, and they were talking about parking, and they all rented in these student housing units, and then the parents are calling, yelling at them because there's no parking, and they didn't read that. They didn't notice that. They were looking at the unit. And so I think we have to be very sensitive, and there's a fine line. And I think that everybody's for more efficiency in our building. Maybe I just haven't read all the data. I know that high-efficiency units save in electric usage, maybe not as cheap as gas. So I don't 100% agree with the rest of the council. So I think there's a fine line, and I think it's cheaper for a builder to say, oh, I only have to pull, you know, electric lines. I don't have to pull the other utilities over. And so I'm going to be very sensitive to that, to say, sure, they're going to jump on that bandwagon, but you know, I want to make sure there's equity in that. And if we have, especially in our renter population, people that maybe could afford the rent. My kids live down in the valley, and they see electric bills in the hundreds of dollars. So, you know, I want to make sure whatever we look at, we're looking at the equity of, yes, it's more efficient to be building an efficient unit and saving on your electric bill, but is it cost savings to the person occupying that unit if they could have had a choice to use also gas? And so I just wanted to put that out there publicly, that it is not an absolute, it's not black and white, and I will be looking for that. And I don't know where the balance is, and a lot of it will have to fall on the shoulders of council and planning and zoning, but I just want to remind everybody that those are not easy black and white issues.
I just make one comment on the building code and energy efficiency. Just want to remind you, one of the partners on our project is GBD Architects, and we specifically brought them on board as experts in green building technologies, energy efficiency, and so they're going to be specifically looking at the building code, the sustainability incentives, and helping us to kind of navigate some of those issues. If it's kind of, where do you set the minimum bar, and then where do you try to encourage to go over the minimum with incentives, and what kind of incentives might work the best? How do we take a look at your tools today and see if we can make them, you know, move the needle further? And to reiterate that is clearly part of the scope of this project. We talk a lot about housing and some of the things I presented, but it's a dual lens on housing and carbon neutrality.
Thank you. So do you and staff, do you feel like you received enough feedback from us and enough direction that you can continue on?
I think for myself personally, we'll let Michelle come up and speak to that too.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you all for your comments, and we will definitely, Reed was feverishly taking notes, and so everything that you've said will be incorporated into our analysis. As Jamin pointed out, we have several different points where we're going to be coming back to you. So our objective is to not get so far down that we're not keeping up with your comments and not checking in. So I think the way it's set up, that this is great feedback for now. And if it wasn't clear, we're also looking at the affordable housing incentive. That's part of the scope. So I know Jamin mentioned it specifically on the sustainability incentives, but we also are doing that with the affordable housing. So it's kind of everything's on the table to be
Do you
looked at.
have an estimate of when you'll be back before us?
I think February, March? Yeah. That's
Great.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for your time and your
Thank you.
comments.
Okay, moving down to item number 8, post-wildfire flooding update. But hold on, it seems like maybe a break is requested. So let's take a 15-minute break and be back in 15 minutes. Let's do it again. Okay, we're ready to get back to it. We are on item number 8, post-wildfire flooding update.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Do you want me to delay for here 30 seconds or so? No. Okay. Here we go. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us this evening and appreciate the time. Scott Overton serves as the Public Works Director. We have not been in front of you in quite some time to talk about post-wildfire flooding updates. Good to see you. Thank you for missing us. To be honest, we had a very quiet summer. You're going to learn a little bit about the quiet activity that we had on our burn scars, and that resulted in, for us, good quality time to continue to develop our long-term mitigations and to work on things that we have advanced. I will tell you in reflection, we visited with you in June. We were possibly anticipating a monsoon season. That did not transpire. We have since had a couple community meetings. There's been continued engineering work. We are 1 year removed from the passage of the bond questions on the Spruce Wash side. We've made tremendous strides on the Pipeline West side that you'll hear about this evening. And really to report on the Spruce side with your bond monies and the community's commitment to those projects, I'm going to estimate this, but we're at about 84% design. And I say that somewhat jokingly, but we are well past 60%, which is really kind of an official benchmark. We're not quite to 90s, but I will tell you the engineering teams have some pretty good assurances of where they're at. They're feeling good about the progress they've made, and I have good confidence that by about year end, we're going to be in a really good place and as close to 100% design as we can be. That's a pretty tremendous effort of engineering resource. That's been a good coordinated effort to get us through this very urban infrastructure and get us to a place where you've now seen construction dollars being spent with our CMAR process and our contractor, Eagle Mountain Construction. So a year later, I think we're in a pretty good spot, but it is not at maybe the, what's the word I'm looking for? Sentence structure's been tough this week for whatever reason. It hasn't been a lack of focus and energy, and really it is not all me. It is a big, big team effort, and I say it every time I get up here, but it's your private engineering community, your private construction companies, and it is the effort of city staff really focused in on a single mission to really deliver these mitigation measures on both sides of the community with the burn scars. And I think we're seeing great successes, and our community is going to benefit from those results. So tonight, you're going to see a pretty thorough presentation. There are a lot of pictures, which is helpful. We're going to cover a lot of information on the west side of Pipeline, and you're going to cover a lot in the Spruce Wash side. You may see a couple of new faces to the dais this evening. We have a couple folks that are out, and we're having a few folks step in, so please be kind and make sure that we recognize that for some of them that might be their first time at the podium this evening, but they're all qualified and able to present, and clearly they have a lot of good information. As always, this is your time to ask us questions, to get the feedback you need, to make sure that you have all your talking points as you go back into the community and you understand where we're headed and why we're doing what we're doing. We get a lot of insights from you as well. So what you might be thinking is something that we've already thought about. Let's make sure we get those out and talk those through. And then the last piece before I turn it over to Connor and the rest of the team will be thank you to our public. We are very disruptive. These are construction projects. There's a lot of landscape changes. Clearly they've lived in a post-wildfire burn scar for some time now. And we know it's frustrating, but we've had very, very good community meetings with great participation. And I credit everyone for continuing to keep cool heads and work through the issues and solve the long division math problems and work towards some pretty super cool solutions. So with that, I just covered really what we're going to do this evening. And towards the end, we'll of course turn it back to you for any questions and discussion. But we're going to start off on the Schultz Creek Pipeline West side, and I believe Stormwater is going to be up first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chase, City Flagstaff Stormwater. So I'll be going over the infrastructure projects that are being designed or have been constructed or are in construction right now for Schultz Creek. The different agencies involved, ADOT, Game and Fish, County, and of course the city. So the first project I'll talk about is the on-force measures that have happened. That's County Flood Control District. Basically starting from Schultz Pass going down almost to the new detention basins, stream stabilization structures all the way along Schultz Creek. Anticipated to be done this winter, 2023. Natural Channel Design was the designer. So here's just some examples of those structures that are being constructed. Rock dam, weirs, you can see in these pictures. More veins, plug and spread structures as well throughout this area. Schultz Creek Basin going downstream from that. That was completed last October. You can see in the picture the purpose to detain floodwaters. That was done by Fan Contracting and SWI. This was a really great project. It was awarded the 2023 American Public Works Association Project of the Year, deservingly so. Downstream of that, Mount Eldon Lookout Road, that was County Public Works. That was completed this summer. You can see in the middle picture, Schultz Creek was overtopping Mount Eldon, so the purpose of this project was to keep Mount Eldon Lookout Road from closing. That was also Natural Channel Design. Baneke constructed that. And pretty much directly downstream from that crossing is Schultz Creek Channel Stabilization. If it's not complete already, it's getting completed very shortly. Purpose of that is to prevent erosion and sediment from moving downstream. Tiffany is constructing that, and that was also Natural Channel Design, funded by the city and federal government. Stavonaway Channel, this was completed this summer too. This was a fast project. This was to provide relief for the ponding and flooding for Stavonaway. Just a channel outletting into the Rio de Flag. You can see in the pictures to the right, the channel and then the outlet structure and the bank stabilization for when the bank was eroded during flooding before this. Highway 180 culvert improvements. So the emergency project that was completed this past summer, it was about $2 million. Was an ADOT project, basically replacing their infrastructure that was damaged and adding more capacity to the crossing. For the long-term project, its purpose is to provide the 100-year storm to be able to cross 180, get into the Rio de Flag. Currently, we're looking at statement of qualifications for construction manager at risk and hoping to get this all constructed by next monsoon season. And SWI is the designer, and this is funded by the city. Lastly, Francis Short Pond. This was completed this fall by Joe Dirt, Eagle Mountain, and NJ Sham. Purpose of this is to get the pond functioning again and removing all that sediment from the flooding. And this was AZ-DEMA funding as well as city. Then I'll turn it over for modeling updates.
Good evening. I wanted to just take you through where we're at with our modeling, what it looks like, and with an understanding of this is a very dynamic system in that as improvements happen, They get put back into our model to make sure they're working right, make sure have an accurate reflection of current conditions. So I wanted to just walk you through that really quick here. On this picture, you can see all the plug and spread structures that you see at the Schultz Pass trailhead. Those are all integrated into the model, so we're seeing how the water acts over them. The Mount Eldon Lookout Road culvert, that's all in so that we have a really accurate reflection of the flood risk through that area. Still based on immediate post-fire conditions with the burnt watershed, but that's the first area. And then when you get downstream towards Highway 180, what this model reflects right now is the interim condition, the pipe that was fixed by ADOT, where one pipe goes over to the Rio de Flag and one pipe continues down towards the bubbler, as we call it, towards above the Stavana neighborhood. And so this gives a current reflection of how the water could still flow along Fort Valley Road, and how it's really reduced in how it flows down through the Stavana neighborhood because of that new construction. It does not include yet the new culvert crossing that'll happen across 180. That'll all be reflected in the upcoming model, and these results will look a lot nicer after that happens. What we can see though is as it doesn't, the current construction that happened, the fix across 180, it doesn't eliminate the downstream flooding problems. So when water still exceeds the capacity of that pipe, it'll still flow down the north side of 180 towards Sechrist. All that water ends up in Meade. Like that's where it goes. That's the low point. And so until the new structure across 180 gets built, you're still going to have the potential for post-fire flooding down to Meade, which if this gets built this spring, that'd be great before monsoons. So that's a current update. There's not a lot else to report, and it'll be updated once again as new projects happen.
So for temporary mitigations, for Pipeline West, not a whole lot has changed. Still doing engineering assessments for those that haven't had one yet. Service request line still up. Sandbags may be removed if we have crews available, but we know our crews are very taxed right now. And we're still putting the message out there that the flood risk is still real, and we're recommending residents keep their mitigations up until at least that 180 project's complete.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Eli Reisner, City of Flagstaff Capital Improvements Project Manager. Tonight I'm just going to go over a brief overview of our spruce wash projects, and then I will get into a little bit more detail on some of these projects, and then go through kind of our milestones and schedules for these projects, and then get into some of the projects that are currently under construction. So starting off with our spruce wash suite of projects, projects 1 through 8, those are the projects that are funded by Proposition 441. And then we also have the Killip Inlet project, which is funded through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then we also have number 10 here, Parkway Basins project, which is actually a county flood control district delivered project funded through the NRCS. And then we also have our list here, as you can see, of several completed projects. So now I'm going to kind of jump into some of our spruce wash projects and give you a little bit more information on those. Our first project here is the Grandview Drive Reconstruction Project. This project is located on Grandview Drive from Cedar down to Linda Vista. This project consists of constructing an inverted crown on Grandview and replacing the existing roll curbs with a modified roll curbs, and those modified roll curbs are going to be a different roll curb than we were originally thinking of with the vertical curbs, like we talked about last time, but these modified roll curbs will help limit impacts to driveway lengths and help expedite construction while still providing the stormwater capacity for the roadway. This project also includes sewer replacements and water replacements, both mains and services for both water and sewer, and those improvements will be included on the side streets and cul-de-sacs along Grandview as well. And again, these improvements will just help to increase the stormwater capacity for the roadway. The next project is the Wedge Detention Basin Project, and this project is located on the city-owned parcel west of Cedar Safeway, just north of Coconino High School. And this project consists of constructing a large detention basin and storm drain pipe that'll help us to pipe some of the Spruce Wash floodwaters from the Linda Vista crossing down to the detention basin. This project will also consist of a few sections of sewer main and water main replacements along Linda Vista that are in conflict with the new storm drain. And this will also include asphalt roadway replacements along Linda Vista and a few sections of sidewalk, curb and gutter along Linda Vista as well. So again, these improvements will help reduce the volume of water that is in the Spruce Wash. Next project is the Linda Vista Drive Crossing Project. And this project is located on Linda Vista Drive at the Spruce Wash intersection that's between Paradise and Adrian Way. This project consists of reconstructing a new concrete box culvert, which will increase the inlet capacity size for this crossing, as well as adding an inlet for the Wedge Detention Basin storm drain, which will again grab some of that stormwater that's in Spruce Wash and pipe that down to the Wedge Detention Basin. So this project will help improve the stormwater capacity of the inlet. It will reduce water that's in the Spruce Wash, and it will keep more of the water in the wash with the additional inlet for the Wedge Detention Basin and limit the overtopping onto Linda Vista at this location. Next project is the Cedar Avenue to Linda Vista Drive project. This project is the section of Spruce Wash Channel from Linda Vista down to Cedar, and that's between Grandview and Monte Vista. Improvements for this project consist of regrading the channel and constructing the channel with a new ArmorFlex block light for about the first 500 feet of the channel, and then the rest of the channel, the majority of the channel, will be constructed with a concrete channel. Improvements also include relocating the existing gas main and services that go up this channel and service all the homes both on Linda Vista and Monte Vista, or both on, Grandview and Monte Vista. And then also consists of relocating portions of the overhead power lines that are in this channel. These improvements will help increase the capacity and efficiency of the channel and help provide protection from the larger volumes of water and larger velocities of water that will now be moving down this section of channel. Next project is the Cedar Avenue Crossing Project, and this project is located on Cedar Avenue at the Spruce Wash between Grandview and Monte Vista. And this project consists of a new, larger concrete box culvert and lowering the flow line of the channel. And again, this will help improve and increase the capacity and efficiency of the channel. Next project is the Arroyo Seco Drive to Dortha Avenue project. And this is the section of channel from Dortha to Arroyo Seco between Main and Rose. And this project consists of removing the existing underground 60-inch storm drain, regrading the channel, and constructing a concrete channel, and relocating some of the gas main and services that are currently underground within this channel section. So these improvements will help to increase the capacity and efficiency of the channel and provide protection from the larger volumes of water and velocities moving down the channel. The next project is the Arroyo Seco Drive Inlet project. And this project is located just north of the Arroyo Seco Townhomes in the northeast corner of the Ponderosa Park. This project consists of reconstructing the inlet with a permanent head wall and lowering the flow line by several feet down to the existing 60-inch storm drain that goes underneath the Arroyo Seco townhomes there. And these improvements will help increase the inlet capacity while also maximizing the amount of water that can go into that existing storm drain that goes underneath the Arroyo Seco townhomes there. The next project is the Killip Basin Inlet Project, which is right next to the Arroyo Seco Drive Inlet Project. Again, right there at the northeast corner of Ponderosa Park. And here we'll be constructing a new inlet that will be connected to a concrete box culvert that goes underneath Ponderosa Park and outlets into the Killip detention basins there by Killip Elementary School. And so these improvements will help send water that the 60-inch storm drain that goes underneath the Arroyo Seco townhomes can't handle into the Killip regional detention basins.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Where does the water that can make it underneath those townhomes, where does that go?
That eventually goes, I think it's down First Street, and then will eventually go cross under Route 66. They're kind of by Sportsman's Warehouse, and then cross the train tracks behind Walmart, and then crosses Butler at 4th there as well, and then goes back down there. So, yeah. The next project is the Killip Basin Outlet Project. This project is located on 6th Avenue between First Street and Main Street. And this will consist of a new outlet from the Killip Basins into a new storm drain that'll help direct additional flows into the West Street storm drain. And these improvements will help to prevent the basins from overtopping onto 6th Avenue. So that wraps up a little bit more in depth on each of the projects. So now I'm going to jump into kind of the milestones and schedule for these projects. So I just want to emphasize the aggressive schedule, both for design and construction for these projects. We had Proposition 441 passing back in November of 2022, and we were able to start construction on the Grandview utilities in less than a year here in September 2023. So that is some incredible work that's been done by our design team, our construction team, city staff, and everybody that's involved in all of our weekly TAC meetings on Mondays to get these projects rolling as fast as we can and actually get to construction here in 2023. As Scott said, we're currently at roughly 84% of the design of the suite of the projects. We're just wrapping up the 60% review of the suite of projects. We're expecting final design of the projects to be done by the end of the year, and then continuing with construction, and then ramping up construction in 2024, and continuing construction in 2025, with construction anticipated to be completed in 2026. And these construction schedules are very preliminary and will change based on weather, and will continue to be something that we refine as we continue to wrap up our designs and all the reviews and kind of sequencing and planning with our CMAR contractor, Eagle Mountain Construction. So that kind of wraps up our milestones and schedule. I'll move over to some of the projects that are currently under construction. So again, this is the Grandview Drive Reconstruction Project, the utilities portion of that project, the water and sewer main portions. This project started on September 5th, 2023, and we're anticipating it to be complete in spring of 2024. We'll be beginning with the sewer improvements, working from south to north and doing the west side sewer services first. That'll be followed by the east side sewer services, and then we'll follow those sewer improvements with the water improvements, again working south to north. Our contractor, Eagle Mountain Construction, has been working with all the local residences and businesses to maintain access during construction. And then once we move into the winter, Eagle Mountain Construction will be responsible for snow removal within the road closure on Grandview, and we will not have any winter parking ordinance enforced on this section of Grandview. And then the next project that's currently under construction is the Parkway Sediment Basins. Again, this is the County Flood Control District delivered project. This project started on October 23rd of this year, and they're anticipating it to be completed by the end of December of this year. This is a series of 3 sediment basins, with the first sediment basin that was completed last summer, and so they are currently working on the 2 upstream sediment basins. Kinney Construction Services was selected by the Flood Control District. These remaining 2 sediment basins. And there's been a lot of coordination with the surrounding residents and stuff, and providing alternative forest accesses off of Paradise and Appalachian there. So KCS finished up the tree removal for these detention basins last week, and they will be continuing with their current earthwork excavation operations for these projects. So, and that wraps us up for the projects that are currently under construction for Spruce Wash. And I'll turn it back over to Joe Lovich with J. Fuller to go through the benefits of the projects identified by the modeling. Joe?
All right. So before I get into this, I thought I would just touch on where we are maybe right now as a watershed. So I don't have a slide about this, but you know, when we if we look back over this last year, we didn't get a lot of rain on the museum fire. Like, pretty infrequent. The storms were very small, so you really didn't see any water coming out of the museum fire. You know, there were some storms on the north end of the pipeline that hit Wapaki trails, but in general, a lot didn't happen this monsoons. And so we're still kind of at this paradigm of where we have an understanding of what we think the watershed could do if you had a big rainstorm on it. We have some data from last year. We have a lot of data from the previous year. And we need to take all this into consideration to understand what we think the current flood risk could be with a sizable storm, like a 2-inch storm that we're designing to. And so it's something it's like an ongoing monitoring process. And until we have data that shows us otherwise, it's still good to be on the kind of conservative end of saying, okay, this could potentially happen if you have that type of rainstorm. And so where we're going down with this design is we're still designing this off of, you know, our last year's flood risk, right? That's going to continue to change, but it's a good baseline point for designing these improvements, understanding how they help the neighborhoods. So what you're looking at here on this slide is the left view is that existing conditions model. The center is some heavy colored lines showing where the projects are that Eli just talked about. And you can also see the new flood results. Then on the right, what you see is depth change based on the projects. So anything that's pink to yellow to red and orange, all of those are decreases. So pretty significant decreases in most places. All the purples and the blues, those are where it increased a little bit, or increased in depth, which you see it on the basin, some of the channels that have been excavated. So what this is showing is, and we're kind of tracking this along as we go through the design, so we have an expected outcome when these are constructed. And so it's showing really the overall net benefit of these projects to a significant number of homes in the area. As we step on down through to Cedar Avenue and south, you see that effect continuing down because you're able to keep more of the water in the channel as you go downstream. And so a lot of the water off of Main Street and Rose Street is eliminated because it's kept in the channel or it's diverted to the Wedge Basin. And moving down further, those benefits stretch all the way down through 6th Avenue and kind of continue on over to 4th Street where the overtopping happens. In the basins, obviously, you see a little bit more water, or you see a higher depth, but we're trying to keep that depth contained to either the right-of-ways or the improvements that we're having. So overall, it's a really positive net benefit that you're going to see with these projects for the modeled storm events. And that this is something, again, as the 90% plans come in, we rerun all these models again and make sure they're acting the way we expect them to act, and making tweaks as necessary. With that, Jace? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you remind me again, the 2-inch storm event, is that a 10-year flood?
It's about a 25-year.
25, thank you.
Yeah. 2 inches in a 45-minute window. Yep.
So I'll talk some about short-term mitigations. First, for the near future, this winter, for Grandview, when the utilities are being replaced and constructing the new roadway, the contractor may be removing or adjusting sandbags if they're in the way. No changes to sandbags will be made outside of Grandview for near future. Residents still encouraged to keep sandbags in place. The longer-term plan, as projects are being constructed for sandbags and short-term mitigations, based on what improvements are shown by future modeling, city and its contractor will work with residents to salvage or replace any sandbags and mitigate to that 2-inch storm that we've talked about. And finally, once all these projects are all complete, it's up to the individual residents to assess and remove sandbags.
And when you say longer term, you're saying after, so is this specific to Grandview?
This is specific just to Spruce Wash area, this longer term plan.
Okay, and so what kind of time frame are you thinking? What is longer term? Is it that you anticipate the projects being done within 2 years?
Yeah, I think we just saw projected before monsoon season of 2026, so kind of before that last project's done.
Yeah, can I add in a couple points?
Yeah, please do.
Let me jump in, and Julie, I might ask you to jump in if you're comfortable, or even Joe, if you see something I miss here. But I think the long-term mitigation is clearly moving us in the right direction. We are changing the base and core infrastructure to accommodate the 2-inch storm as best as possible. I think we've had a lot of questions about sandbags. I think as a city, we recognize everyone's desire to get away from sandbags and short-term mitigations. In fact, that is one of the primary reasons we are involved. It is not sustainable to keep maintenance on 1 million sandbags and miles of barrier throughout the Sunnyside and Grandview neighborhoods. We're in a little bit of hesitation, and I don't want to hedge, but we also have to prove up our models, and we have to prove up the improvements once they're delivered. And I think it really does send mixed signals to our residents to say, remove these sandbags and this will be fixed. We know we're getting better, and I'm confident that these models are going to show improvement. I think the difficulty is, and what I've asked the engineering teams to work through, and I think we're starting to think this way, is how do you develop that plan or strategy as each project is delivered that will provide some relief? And I think the core for me, and what I always remember, is the entire suite of projects works as a system. So until we complete the last project, which really is the Linda Vista crossing, and we're able to open up the throat of the channel and really get water into where it belongs, the system doesn't work until then. So even though you'll see the improvements on Grandview completed, and you'll see a benefit to a degree, I think that you're going to continue to have to look at the models and the science and understand that the Linda Vista crossing is the key piece. But if we were to open up the Linda Vista crossing today, which makes sense for Grandview residents, we are not prepared at Arroyo Seco or in the Dorothy Channel or at the Cedar Crossing, and we just create this cascading effect of problems. I will tell you, I've worked with stormwater long enough now to know that this is a tremendous effort. it is hard for us to keep these sandbags. I think as a city, we need to recognize there will be a financial commitment, and we'll have to somehow try to assist residents in the interim. Our goal is to be completed with the suite of projects before monsoon of '25. We're on track. But we know we have at least one more season of a pretty difficult year for the residents throughout the entire process. So I hope I provided a little more perspective of the why we can't come out and say, you can remove it this home or on this corner. I know we're getting better, but until the system is working, we're gonna be very hesitant, and the engineering community will be somewhat conservative in their response, as they should be, and we should be as a city, in my opinion. We're trying to do our best to protect property and those people's residences, and so far it's been working, but we completely understand the inconvenience of sandbags and the unsightliness. That's why we're heading in this direction, but it's just more difficult than trying to say, once this segment's done, you can remove your sandbags. I think we're gonna see people do that, but it can't be at our advice.
Thank you. Councilmember McCarthy?
Just a small question. On the wedge detention basin,
Yeah.
once that fills up, does it, then you drain it out at a slower rate, or does it just evaporate, or what?
I've learned more about this topic than you care to understand, I would imagine, but let me have Julie kind of give you kind of a brief highlight of where they're at with the design on the wedge. Their firm is designing the wedge. It's a pretty complex equation because it only has a set amount of capacity, but they're doing a good job coming up with some alternative analysis and some engineered solutions. Do you want to speak to them? All right. I think you're better to speak to the equation than I am, I would hunch.
Yes.
Could you be brief? Please be brief.
Yes, but I think
Oh,
one
where
thing-
does that water go?
So that actually goes into a storm drain that's on Cedar and goes back into Spruce Wash. So we hold on to it for a little while. We wait till the peak flows pass in Spruce Wash and then bleed it out in a smaller diameter pipe. But go ahead, Councilmember.
That makes sense.
Yes, and I think one thing that you might be interested in is how we control the flow going into the wedge. And this was pretty complicated because once that basin is full, we have to cut off the flow to it. So we've been working with structural engineers and hydrologists and figuring that out. And what we've come up with is a gate-type system that will have an actuator that will become part of the emergency management protocol and monitoring when we have a large storm event. And so that gate system, that'll happen at the wedge itself, just upstream in the pipe. All right. Any other questions for me?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, thanks.
All right, so we were up to the questions slide, correct?
Yeah.
So, council, do you have overall questions, any additional questions? Or comments? Okay, I think we asked all of our questions, so thank you so much, all of you. It's really nice to be here discussing these things in terms that are more planning and less reacting. And I'm sure you feel the same way. All right, so moving down to item number 9, discussion of draft advertising policies for Flagstaff, Pulliam Airport, and city recreation facilities.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kevin Finsel, Deputy City Attorney. I'm just going to pull up the presentation for tonight. All right, yeah, we're here to talk about the draft city advertising policy. I'm up here tonight to talk about it, but I also have Heidi Hansen with Economic Vitality here with me. along with Brian Gall, our Airport Director, and Rebecca Sayers, our Parks and Recreation Director. And we may have Claire Harper online with us, but she is currently out of town. But if any questions come up, I have them to assist me, but I'll be leading the conversation this evening. So this is the agenda for tonight's discussion. I want to recap what we talked about on September 12th, give a little bit background clarification, talk about what we've been doing since that meeting on September 12th. I'm going to provide a very high-level legal overview that is really just for the benefit of the public, maybe correct some narratives that are out in the public regarding this issue. It's not going to be legal advice. Essentially, it's just going to be some quotations from legal cases that are pretty generic, but hopefully give a little bit of overview of the legal issues we're talking about. Then I'm going to talk about the changes to the draft policy since our last meeting. We'll provide some options for council to consider. Council then will have the opportunity to ask any questions, and we'll discuss with council and receive direction from council. And I forgot we'll have public comment mixed in there too, if anyone's online. So recap of our September 12th discussion. This was when Heidi came in and presented the draft advertising policy for council to consider. Staff provided some background regarding the purpose and intent of the policy, where we were trying to head with it. It was then discussed with council, and we received council's feedback and comment. Definitely the hot topic that was presented that night was a proposed regulation of advertising regarding firearms, which we'll discuss again tonight. Council provided some suggested changes to that draft policy, and now we're back to discuss not only council's suggested changes that you'll see, but also some additions that we added as staff as we started working through this a little bit more. So background clarification, and this doesn't really have to do with the policy in a sense, but I wanted to talk about this really to correct some narratives in the public that we've been seeing in some articles that have been floating around on this issue. I mean, the press is there for a reason, but sometimes things aren't necessarily presented 100% accurate, so we wanted to take this opportunity at this public discussion to correct some of those. So I'll be talking about some of that. I'll walk through some statements and really try to just share with the public and with council where we think, how we can correct some of those narratives. So I want to start with how we got here. And first of all, I have an error on here. Heidi just informed me of last minute. Prior to 2021, that really should be prior to 2022. Prior to 2022, advertising at the airport was managed by Clear Channel, which is a third-party vendor. They actually stopped running the program at the airport December 31st of 2021. So as of January 1st, 2022, city staff took over that program. When city staff took over the program, advertising standards for the airport were adopted. We already had similar standards at our recreation facilities. We were using those for advertising on the dashboards, and pretty much the same standards carried over in the airport. We're using them in their application process. In April 2023, that's when Timberline Firearms requested the opportunity to advertise at the airport. Timberline shared a proposed ad with staff. Staff at the time at the airport was concerned about a portion of the ad did not comply with those standards that had been adopted. Staff shared those concerns with Timberline, and Timberline was unwilling to change the ad. They really just wanted to stick to the same ad they had submitted. And then there started to be an argument about the standards and how they should be applied. At that point, internal discussions commenced here at the city, airport staff they brought in our office, they brought in the city manager's office, and we just really started talking about this issue. And it was decided we needed to really take some steps to clarify the standards. And that's really to provide clear standards, not only with respect to Timberline's ad, but also with all of our advertisers. Timberline really just made us look at it a little bit closer, and in looking at it a little bit closer, we thought, we can really make these a little bit clearer. And that was really our goal. And so that's when we started working internally and then putting this on the agenda for September 12th to come and talk to council and the public about some proposed options for this policy. So here are the points of clarification. And again, this is really just to make sure we're all on the same page here and what's going on. First of all, and to clarify, these are coming directly from articles that I've seen on this topic since it's September 12th, and that's really what I'm trying to clarify here. The first one, for example, is a headline that right after the meeting, there was a headline in a newspaper saying council took a stance on this issue. It's not true. Council, that was a work session. You didn't take any action. We asked for direction. Council had some good comments. It was very clear we were coming back with something in the future for council to consider further and possibly take action at a future date. But at that September 12th meeting, council did not take a stance on anything. This quote, again, from an article, the city is not abusing its power to push an anti-gun agenda. I thought this was a little surprising to see because in the conversation we had on September 12th, I think it was very clear that at least certain members of council were looking for a way for a gun seller like Timberline, a range like Timberline to find a way to advertise, but in a way that we felt made sense and was appropriate in our facilities. It was not we don't want to see any sort of advertising regarding firearms, and that's, I think, really where council went, and we'll see that as an option for council to consider in the policy. Kept seeing this narrative that staff, when they received this request in April, took a different direction, really stepped in and said, you know, we're going to do something different, and it's not really what's going on. Timberline did advertise at the airport. According to the records we have from Clear Channel, again, this was not us at the time, so we've been working with our vendor to try to get information. They let us know that Timberline did advertise at the airport in August of 2019 for about 4 weeks. After that, we don't have any records. I did try to clarify this with Timberline through their attorney today, and I didn't get a response back. It's not any fault of theirs. I didn't give them a ton of time, but we were trying to get clarification here and make sure we're 100% accurate. But again, according to our records, this is not a situation where we had someone advertising the airport, as we see in the articles, continuously since 2019 or every summer since 2019, and then all of a sudden staff decided out of nowhere we're not going to accept this ad anymore. It really was staff's application of the standards that had been adopted at the airport since Timberline ran that ad in 2019. Yeah.
Apparently, Timberline did advertise a few years ago. I won't worry about the date so much, but was the content different than what was proposed recently by them? Or do you know?
We think we know. We think we have a good grasp on it. That's something else we looked at. The ad that was submitted, or the content, I'll say, or the creative is I think the term that's used, was the same that was submitted. What was different in 2019 is, at the time, our understanding is that because of the monitors that were being used and basically some limitations we had at the airport, all we were displaying at the time were still images. It wasn't a video. So it was the same creative that was submitted, but it was not the video portion of the ad that was submitted in 2023 that was being run in 2019. And I think that's really where, when staff saw that, and again, different staff, right? We have a different airport director. We have staff there that were not there in 2019, so they were really seeing this for the first time. When they saw it, just took a step back and said, I think we need to talk about this. But yeah, it was, so same creative, but we think it was presented in a different way in 2019 than what was being proposed here.
Thank you, Mayor.
And the last one there, Timberline, this is my statement, but I don't think Timberline was denied the ability to run an ad at the airport. Again, I think Timberline wanted to run a certain ad at the airport and that staff took issue with or wanted to discuss and possibly edit. Timberline, and they have every right to, wanted to stick to the ad that they produced, wanted to have that ad run, and that's the ad that was not run. But I don't think that means that Timberline was denied the ability to advertise at our airport. And the last point there, and I'm going to get to this on the next slide, and again, this is, again, just to create the public narrative. I don't want to make it sound like I'm being defensive up here, but I'm just really trying to correct, because I think there was this narrative too that, and I take this out of the articles, that the city this was really directed at Timberline and the owner of Timberline, and I don't feel that way. I think they, like I said before, they made us look at it. They made us really consider our policy and think about it a little bit more. But it was never an attempt to, prevent Timberline from advertising at all. Definitely not in the city. We were looking at our facilities, right? This is not a city ordinance that prevents a certain type of advertising anywhere in the city. This is just in our airport and in our recreation facilities. And I point this out because and I have an email here and I don't want to read it, but essentially what it shows is just that, this is July, so this is when we're talking about it, Internally, this is when we're talking about it with Timberline. And this is an email from our economic vitality director to the owner of that organization, talking about other ways to market and highlighting Discover Flagstaff, which is what we use here in Arizona. They promote all businesses in Flagstaff. They promote all businesses in Flagstaff, and we were talking about this with him, and again, the owner, Timberline, can do what they want, but I just show this because I want people to understand that this was not us trying to not allow someone to advertise in this city or not assist that person in advertising in the city. I think we were really, or staff was really trying to work with this business. So I just pointed that out. So that's all I have on that. Happening September 12th. I did meet with Mr. Wilson after the meeting on September 12th. I think those are always good discussions. I think our office is always open to that. If anything, our goal is to get it right. And so I met with Mr. Wilson. It was a great conversation. We met for a little bit over an hour. He shared his concerns. I tried to give him a little bit of a better understanding of where staff was coming from. We talked about other issues. You're going to see, and I'm going to point out in the draft policy, he actually made a comment that I added into the draft policy that I'll share with you because I think it was a good comment. He had other comments about facilities here, City Hall, as well as the airport. I thought they were good. I've talked with our deputy city manager about some of the issues at City Hall that he raised, as well as our airport director about some of the issues at the airport he raised. It had nothing to do with this policy. They were just good comments from a resident of our community. And I just want to share that because I think we're trying to work with, we will listen to anyone in our community. We don't shut anybody off. And I think Mr. Wilson came in and had a very fair conversation. I just want to make sure people understand that as well. We did meet with the attorney for Goldwater. You all saw the letter from Goldwater. And I'm not going to go over what's in that letter. Like I said, I think everybody's seen it, but we did meet with the attorney for Goldwater that wrote the letter. Sterling and I did. Again, great conversation. We're always open to that. We didn't spend a ton of time. I don't think we got into a lot of the legal issues in detail, but again, just share where we were coming from. He shared where he and his client were coming from. But it definitely stayed at a little high level, but it was a good conversation walking out of there. And then we revised the draft policy based on the council comment. So this section is a little different for a presentation from our city attorney's office up here in public. But I want to give a little bit of background about why we're doing it. So as you know, we give legal advice in e-session. We don't give legal advice at the dais. We don't come in here and give legal advice to our council. But sometimes when you have that legal advice in e-session, the public obviously can't see it, and we're not going to share it with them. But there's certain issues that I think we can give a high-level sort of black letter law explanation or just some information for the public so they may have a better understanding of how we're looking at this issue. And so I talked to Sterling about that. He was open to it. We did this before with Prop 207 back in the day. We gave a presentation to council on that issue. Again, same thing, just kind of walk through the statute. So council understood what Prop 207 was a little bit more about. And so, again, this is a little odd, but we're going to do it. And I'm going to stay, like I said, really high level. I'm not giving any legal advice here. I'm not going to answer any of your questions about any of the stuff I share here. But I think if there's anybody listening in the public and they have a question about the law, maybe this points them in the right direction to do some of their own research. But I'm going to focus on the First Amendment. There's the First Amendment from the Constitution. Again, like I said, it's going to be all quotes and anybody can access it. So speech on public property. This is a quote from a Supreme Court case. And I put this in here just so people understand that the U.S. Constitution does not require cities like Flagstaff to allow any speech anybody wants on our property. We are able to put restrictions on speech in certain areas. We have to follow certain rules, but just want to make it clear that there are some limitations we can put in. And this is a good quote from another case. I actually saw this at a conference I went to, and I think it's it's a little bit about the give and take that this selective process allowing cities and towns to put some restrictions on really allows us to open things up. And I think what this court was saying was, if you force cities and towns to allow everything, they may just not open anything up. And that's not good either.
we want to allow some speech on our property. And so this is the analysis that has been coming, the forum analysis. There's a little quote there again. This is from an Arizona case. This was one that was actually cited in one of the first letters council received on this issue. And again, I'm not going to read it, but it just talks about this forum analysis, and that's what we look at when we start talking about speech on government property. And so 3 main forums, I'll say 3 main, there's some cases that go beyond that, but the first traditional public forum, this is parks, streets, sidewalks. They obviously get the most protection. That's where people are expected to gather and protest and things along those lines. A designated public forum, this is an area that's not a traditional public forum, but has sort of been opened up for that same purpose, to have that, as this court put it, that public discourse. And then the third one that we'll be talking about, and this is as stated in our draft policy, we consider our airport, our facilities, the airport and the recreation facilities to be non-public forums. So this is really what we're looking at when or the rules, I'll say, we're looking at when we're talking about this airport advertising policy and the recreation facilities advertising policy. And I think the key here, why I think this is important is, the one thing about a non-public forum, it allows you to regulate content, which is really rare in a First Amendment context. Usually when you regulate content, it's an automatic, you've done something wrong. But a non-public forum is different, and that's one of the main differences. Again, we have to follow certain rules when we do regulate content, but we are allowed to do it. Last item, forums can be closed when we open something like advertising at the airport or advertising at recreation facilities. There's nothing in the law that says you have to keep it open. We can close it if we want, and that's an option we'll discuss with council a little bit tonight. Do you mind grabbing my water back there? Sorry. So changes to the draft policy. So I'm going to walk through these, and then I'll actually pull up the policy, and we'll walk through the policy, and I'll refer back to this list. But as you can see, based on what's attached to the agenda, we did create 2 policies. We separated it out, and it really makes a lot of sense. That's probably my error in the beginning. Forums are different. A recreation facility is different than an airport. In our initial draft, we had an exemption for alcohol advertising at the airport. So we were kind of doing the same thing, but instead of having exemptions here and there, it just made more sense to divide them up and really focus on the differences between the 2 forums. We expanded the purpose section a little bit, added a little more discussion about the additional goals and objectives that each facility has in addition to advertising. Expanded the statement regarding non-public forum status, then clarified the permitted types of advertising. We had this before, that this is really where we limited this is to commercial advertising. We had some bullets that kind of broke out what commercial advertising is. I put them back together in a paragraph that I think described it a little bit better. Added a limitation on elected PSAs. So this is the comment I received from Mr. Wilson. So in our first draft, we talked about the PSAs at the airport, namely where we have maybe over the loudspeaker, Councilmember McCarthy welcoming individuals to the airport, into Flagstaff, and hoping they enjoy all the great things that Flagstaff has to offer. You also will see that on certain displays, so it's the same thing, and we talked about that's not regulated by this policy. But let me give you the limitation. So in my discussion with Mr. Wilson, he raised the issue of, well, if there's a council member or another elected official that's in one of those PSAs and they're up for re-election, is it really fair to allow them to have those PSAs running for a certain period of time before the election? And I thought it was a good comment. You'll see I added in that for council consideration into the policy. So that's something new that I'll point out. We added a restriction on ads depicting graphic violence. I think this came from Councilmember McCarthy, where we mentioned last time we removed the statement we had before about violence. And I think Councilmember McCarthy asked to put something back in, so I did. We provided the options regarding firearm advertising that we'll discuss. We added a restriction depicting the use of weapons in a manner intended to harm an individual or animal. So, any sort of weapon, if there's an ad that's depicting it in a manner that is harming an individual or an animal, that can now be restricted. And then this next one, added a restriction on advertising that promotes or markets adult-oriented business. So this one came up in my conversation with Mr. Wilson as well, really from me giving him an example of, through our discussion, and my example focused on the adult-oriented businesses, and made me remember that we didn't have anything like that, any restriction like that in our policy, so I added that in. I thought it made sense. And then last, we added a statement regarding viewpoint neutrality. I think this came from Councilmember McCarthy as well as an individual from the public who has called me a couple times asking just some questions about this policy, giving me some thoughts. And so we added something in there to make it very clear that this policy is viewpoint neutral, that if we prohibit a certain subject matter for advertising, that we're going to not allow an ad coming out, like an anti-ad on that same subject matter. So, you know, we're not going to have any ad one way or the other. So let me pull up, if I can do this, the policy. And we'll walk through it real quick so council can see. What was done. And I won't spend a lot of time. I mean, like I said, you've had this. But so you can see the purpose section there was expanded. We added the goals and objectives of the different facilities of the airport and of the recreation facilities, talked a little bit about what their purpose is in the community, expanded the non-public forum status there. So just gave a little more detail on that issue. Didn't really touch applicability much. Talking about the permitted types of advertising, you can see there the bullets for commercial advertising have now been condensed into a paragraph, but it's essentially the same thing. I've tweaked the language a little bit here and there, but I don't think anything substantively changed much there. What's allowed is commercial advertising, what's not allowed is non-commercial. We talk about government advertising, and there is the section here where we talked about the PSAs, and this is what we added after my conversation with Mr. Wilson. And council can, when we get to the discussion point, can say whether or not you like it. But we thought it was a fair addition on this issue to address the concern he raised. And then getting into the content restrictions, F is the addition regarding graphic violence. So that's what we added there. G is the firearms section, and you can see the different options. The option 1 was from the initial draft. Option 2, this really came from council through that discussion, talking about, there seemed to be 3 or 4 council members when we talked about that, asking whether we could just focus on the depiction of the use of weapons. I have that in red, that last piece, because in looking at this a little bit more, even after we sent this draft out, I don't think that really belongs there. I think that's something that I would propose to delete, because I think really where council was going is on the depiction of the use of firearms. It's kind of odd to have the depiction of the use of ammunition, and the depiction of the use of related goods or services, I think is, and I think based on where council was going would be fair. For example, if there was a video of a person standing in a gun shop holding binoculars used for hunting, or some targets used for target practice, I didn't think council had a concern with that. That got left in from the initial, and looking at it a little bit closer, I think that's probably something that I would delete in that option too. And then 3 is really no restriction on firearms at all. And I put in there with the new addition of F regarding graphic violence, and H, which we added to just grab advertisements that are about weapons in general, or weapons used inappropriately, I'll say, in general, unrelated to firearms altogether, but could include firearms. So 3 would be, don't do anything for G, basically delete it, and just rely on F and H. And then down N is the new section on adult-oriented businesses, so that was added. And then in red here, the things in red are things that were not in the packet, so that's why I'm calling it out in red. So this is the statement on viewpoint neutrality that I proposed after the packet went out, so it's something to consider.
I can't read it.
Oh, you can't, I'm sorry.
Could you make it a lot bigger?
Is that better?
That's a lot better, thank you.
Okay.
And I'm sure the people in the public, on video would appreciate that expansion also.
Yeah, no problem. 6 and 7 we didn't touch. So that was just about locations and then the application and review process. So that's what the changes look like.
You leave that one up a little longer.
Definitely, yeah. So I think the next item in my outline was to allow council discussion. Sorry, I can't put up two documents at the same time, so. Yeah, I think right now it's just council questions. So if you have any questions about the changes to the policy.
Oh, could you put the red letters up?
Oh, yes, sorry, there you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Council, questions, comments, discussion, ideas?
Sure.
Okay, Councilmember Matthews?
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm just more thinking out loud, but what concerns me is having any policy where we're determining the definition, you know, everything has a gray line around it. I'm kind of swaying towards just, I mean, the advertising at the airport is not something we depend on for a revenue stream, really. And I just get a little concerned about people's interpretation of what may be offensive or depiction of something. So I'm kind of swaying to just opt out of any advertising at the airport and just, I feel that that's a more equitable way to do it so that we're not having these discussions every time there's something that we didn't think about. And then we're like, oh, shoot, we didn't think about it this way. And I just don't see that it's something that we rely on as a revenue source. And so I think it would be fair just to not do the advertising.
Yeah, and like I said before, that's definitely an option for council to consider. And when I throw back up the direction slide, you'll see that. That's really the first question. Do you want to continue advertising at the airport and at the recreation facilities? So, yeah, fair comment.
City Manager, was that you that said quick comment?
If it's appropriate at this time, thank you. I'd like to start by thanking Kevin for his very diligent review of this. He's been engaged in this for months now, and you're getting the high-level overview, but there's been a lot of work. Really appreciate the efforts. We have chatted internally on this, as you could imagine, several times. So I would like to echo Councilmember Matthews' comments and speak, you know, as in your capacity, in my capacity as your city manager, but I think a few others in the organization that I've consulted with share my thoughts. The forum needs to be closed. The advertisement at the airport, along with the advertisement at some of our recreational facilities, is not a big revenue generator here. We're talking maybe tens of thousands of dollars annually. And you know, Kevin's done an excellent job walking you through all the considerations to be had here predicated on legal foundation. My recommendation is predicated on administrative foundation. This is not worth it. The option here to simply close the forum is one that is advocated. Again, the revenue generating nature of this advertisement is not significant. It pales in comparison to some of the larger venues that have been referenced in some of the case law, you know, King County in Washington or City of Phoenix, where these revenues are significant, but that is not the case in Flagstaff. These revenues are small. The cost of litigation, however, is no smaller here, arguably, than it might be in some of these other jurisdictions. The cost could very much be closely the same. And so litigation on this could be very costly.
and will quickly exceed any benefit that we realize through the revenues that we're talking about. So as fiduciaries of our citizens' tax dollars, we do not see it prudent to see the potential exorbitant costs that would be involved with litigation over a program that is not of great financial benefit or consequence to the city. So this is not singling out any one advertiser or even the content-based nature of this. It's simply looking at it from a financial and fiduciary standpoint and coming to the conclusion that it's not worth the potential cost to the city. Thanks for letting me weigh in on this.
Thank you both, and I agree with both of you, and I think that Discover Flagstaff does such an outstanding job of marketing the city that this is a great location for them to continue this very brand-specific advertising, and they always knock it out of the park, so to speak. So I agree. Already so much work has gone into just looking at this issue, and our time, staff time. So I would support just not having an open forum in terms of advertising. Councilmember McCarthy.
So just so I understand the comments of the last three speakers, the proposal would be that we don't take commercial advertising, but we could still have our own advertising, Discover Flagstaff. Is that correct? That's my suggestion. Others may want to weigh in on this, and we have others here with the airport and with our recreational facilities who can speak to this, and Kevin can also chime in, but that's my recommendation. All right, thank you.
Just to clarify that, I don't think it would, if you decided to close the forum, it would be closing it to any paid advertisements at the floor, at the airport, at the recreation facilities. If I understand your question correctly, we wouldn't then open it to Discover Flagstaff to do its advertising through our airport or recreation facility. I think what you would see is, like you see in City Hall, where we may have a public service message, notification about something going on in the city, or, the PSAs from council saying, welcome to Flagstaff. Thank you for using the Flagstaff Pulliam Airport, but we wouldn't be advertising any businesses in the airport.
And I wasn't referencing businesses. I meant more like when you're in Flagstaff, just the typical messages that Discover Flagstaff has. But I understand that you're saying that would stop short of recommending specific businesses in Flagstaff.
Correct. I wouldn't go there.
Well, this is a good discussion. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, Heidi Hansen, Economic Vitality Director. I was just asking Sterling, our city attorney, when we're stewards of the bedboard and beverage tax, and so it is our job in our advertising to talk about those attractions, hotels, restaurants, and campgrounds that actually pay that 2%. So in our advertising, if we're talking about dark skies, sometimes there will be a notation that it's at Lowell. If we're talking about our brewery trail, sometimes in the advertising, it will show our 8 breweries listed. If we show a item from restaurants, sometimes we will give credit to where that food item is from. So I just want to make it clear that if someone were to come to the airport, they might see actual businesses on our advertising, but that's because that's how we market the destination, so that people say, oh, well, that looks really appetizing. I think I'll go there this evening. And we actually do a good job spreading that around. But I just want to make it really clear to the public and to all of you that that could be something that you would see in our advertising.
Thank you, Mayor. So Kevin, how does that translate over to an advertising policy, what Heidi just said? If we close the forum, does that allow for Discover Flagstaff to continue to promote Flagstaff, or do we have to find somewhere in the middle?
So that you're You're asking me for my legal advice there. I'm not really comfortable talking about that. I think the question for council is whether you want to close the forum to paid advertising at the airport, the type of advertising we currently have. If that's the decision that's made, our office will obviously work with staff and on what that means and what those parameters are. But I'd rather not get into that right now.
Okay, I guess I was asking, because it wouldn't be paid advertising that Discover Flagstaff would be,
I understand that.
so,
I understand what you're saying.
so if we're saying no paid advertising, then that's clear, and that doesn't include Discover Flagstaff because they're part of the city.
I don't know if it's as simple as that. So again, I'd rather not get into that right now.
Fine.
I don't want to draw any lines on that right now at all.
Councilmember McCarthy.
So I'll see if I understand what's going on here. If there's a consensus on this proposal that the city manager and Councilmember Matthews made, then I presume that that would be informal advice. It would go back to staff, then they would draft some kind of formal policy, and then that would come back to council again to fill in all these little details. Is that correct? Or would this be the end of it right tonight?
I think that would be the end of it. I think at that point, administratively, our office can work with the city manager's office with economic vitality and the airport to take the direction council gave, which is to close the forum and make sure we do that appropriately and don't raise other issues. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Right. I'll just add that I do support this proposal of the city manager and Ms. Matthews.
Okay.
Oh, and the mayor, too.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
So Wayne, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for all the analysis and hard work on this over the months. And thank you so much for weighing in, City Manager. When you speak, I do listen. I think you have a particularly close ear to the ground, and you know, and you have proven very well that you manage the city to an exemplary standard. And just, you know, listening to this discussion this evening, I find myself agreeing with what I think is now a consensus, that we go ahead and just close the forum. I would just add that I think it's unnecessary under Section 4 to add anything about elected officials who are possibly running for re-election. I would just strike all that too. You might as well not add that in addition here.
I'm going to strike the whole policy.
Yeah. So, you know, I just see unintended consequences with that little tweak as well, and we should just leave it alone and keep it the way it is. I don't think it's campaigning for an elected official who's currently in their role to be public and out there on behalf of the city. So it's just more complicated than it's worth. So I just wanted to add that 2 cents, and thank you very much.
Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure if I am fully clear on what was being stated a moment ago about the potential need to go into e-session on the question regarding Discover Flagstaff. But I sense that there is a consensus now, and I might be overruled on this anyway. But I'm not comfortable moving forward with a no advertising policy without hearing more on the potential impact to Discover Flagstaff and their obligation, as Heidi just shared, to promote businesses contributing to the BBB tax. I think that would be an important bit of advisement and information for us to have. So I would, if we were going to continue the conversation, I would ask for us to go into e-session so that we could have that discussion before making a final decision here. But I might be outvoted by the majority, so it may not matter anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Could we say that, as you stated it, Kevin, that you all will look at, you'll look at this, and if there's anything that goes counter to anything that a council member has said, as you're looking through the materials, you'll come back to us for us to address that?
I think that's fair. I really do think once council gives their thoughts here and direction on closing the forum, I think it's something we can talk about administratively. I really do. I understand the concern that Councilmember House is raising, and again, that's not something I was prepared to talk about here at the dais. I don't even know if I'm prepared to talk about it in E-session if we go into E-session. But I just want to say that if the council gives the direction I think they just gave, that we want to make sure we do that in a way that complies with the law. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Councilmember McCarthy?
So if we go with the close the forum proposal of the city manager, then the wording in these draft documents becomes moot. They won't even exist.
Correct.
So the comments that the vice mayor made, we don't really need to consider, assuming we go ahead with the no forum, no public forum option.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean,
Thank you.
This was the slide, so.
Thank you for the time and the research and the consideration that you put into this matter, and for giving us so much to work with and so much to consider. And I think it was an interesting conversation to have, and
Yeah, and staff as well. Like I said, staff has been working on this. I am staff, but the other staff that have also helped on this, I think, spent a lot of time and put in a lot of effort on trying to really figure this one out.
thank you.
Yep.
And Mayor, if I may, I don't know if there is any public comment. I don't see anybody in chambers, and none online. Okay.
No public comment? All right. So we are moving down to item number 10, public participation. I see no public participation. So then we're moving down to item number 11, informational items to, from mayor, council, and city manager, and future agenda item requests. I'm going to start online with Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try and be brief. I had the opportunity last week. Councilmember Matthews, correct me if I'm wrong. Time means nothing to me anymore. But I believe it was just last week we had the opportunity to go down and view the Canal Convergence art installation and several other cities in Arizona's art council organizations. It was a wonderful, quick tour of all of those places, and spoke a lot to the potential for the cultural engagement and economics of the arts for our city. So I look forward to continuing that conversation. And then my last thing for today is I'd like to introduce a fair that addresses some of what we spoke about today with the Flagstaff Shelter Services presentation, and some of what was spoken to last week by the members of the community that came out and spoke about camping. I'd like to have a discussion about re-examining the charter for the Housing Commission and seeing about adding some sort of clarification or appointment there that enables the voice of a member of the community who is directly impacted by homelessness or unsheltered status. I know we have citizen representation or community representation on that committee, but it's not very specific to saying that we want a voice on that advisory committee that is directly impacted or has that lived experience. And I think that would be a very valuable conversation point to add to that conversation going into the future. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you. I attended the pedestrian advisory committee meeting this week, and we talked about roundabouts and other interesting things. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
That sounds very pedestrian. City manager liked my joke. Pun is always a good way to end the evening. I'm gonna pass this evening. I will mention briefly that we had a visit with the Hopi Tribal Council yesterday. It went really well. I suspect the mayor might want to speak more to that, so I won't steal her thunder.
Thank you. Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor, and yes, I will yield to you to speak about the wonderful visit that we had with the Hopi tribe and the chairman and vice chairman, so that's all I have.
Okay, I just have a couple of things. I spent all day Wednesday at the Economic Collaborative of Northern Arizona retreat, which was really informational, and it was some good discussions, and I would encourage the public to check out the webinars that Econa has on its website. They did a strategic plan, and there are a series of webinars that take that strategic plan into little chunks, and they're about an hour each. And the webinar, econa-az.com. And we also had the Sister Cities, Arizona Sister Cities Conference in Flagstaff. On Saturday, Friday night, NAU treated us to a reception in their International Student Pavilion, and I had never been in that building. So we got to dance a little bit and have some food with our sister city of Navajo, Mexico, Sonora, Mexico. And they were here all day on Saturday, and it was just a great conference. I want to thank everyone who volunteered for Stuff the Bus, the food drive for the Flagstaff Family Food Center over this past weekend, and let you know that they have a matching gift that Desert Financial Credit Union has offered to them, $25,000 matching gift. So if you're going to make a donation to the Flagstaff Family Food Center, now is a great time to do it. And finally, we did have an outstanding visit with our neighbors on the Hopi Reservation. We met with the chair and the vice chair, and it was Vice Mayor and Councilmember Matthews, myself, City Manager, and then Rose Tohe. And thank you, Rose, for all your work that you put into bringing this about. And Rose had this great presentation that started this conversation, discussion between us all about some of the work that the city is doing specifically as it pertains to our indigenous residents and indigenous neighbors around Flagstaff. And I am looking forward to our next one, which I believe is going to be on the Navajo Nation. And I look forward to many more of these and just strengthening those relationships and learning how we as a city can take steps to do even better and to share the information of what we're already doing. And I'm appreciative. That's a lot of time to take out of everyone's schedules, and I really appreciate that we did that. So thank you to staff for making that happen. And that is all that I have. City Manager?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Great, then we're adjourned.